Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 371. Mute's Chest. The treasure of our great white sword sect is actually so astonishing by just coming out from the ground. Nearly everyone in Great White Sword Sect was escaping off the mountain. However, the three elders didn't retreat and advanced toward the mouth of the volcano instead. They shouted, "Heavenly Devil Cult Master can't take the treasure in the mountain, so he's merely diverting our attention until he could. Everyone, don't run. This is the blessing of the founding master to strengthen our Great White Sword Sect, conferring the treasure in Great White Mountain to us. This is a sign that our Great White is going to prosper." Another old woman cried out, "Heaven pitied us." A white-haired elder raised his head to the sky and let out a long sigh. He said loudly, "The founding master of our Great White Sword Sect said that this was a place where dragons prospered and we were bound to flourish and prosper with them. And the prophecy has indeed come true today. All disciples, listen up. Today is the day when our Great White Sword Sect will prosper and surpass the three big sacred grounds. Come back and let us fight together to subdue this treasure." Numerous disciples of Great White Sword Sect heard his words and stopped immediately. They no longer ran, but turned back. Great White Sword Sect had never had many people. There was the sect leader who had gone to the capital to file an imperial appeal, and besides him, only 3 elders and over a dozen middle-ranking personnels were left behind on the mountain. They were all in charge of teaching the 100 disciples. At that moment, numerous people of the sword sect chose to stay behind and retrieved the sword cases that had been blown away. The black-colored sword cases thumped as they landed around Great White Mountain that was almost crumbling. The huge sword cases that were 20 yards tall opened up, and countless flying swords flew out like streams from a long river. In midair, Qin Mu stood on 2 dragons who exerted all their strength to sprint away. Numerous other dragons followed beside him and flew into the distance. Qin Mu turned back to take a look and saw flying swords transforming into clouds above Great White Mountain with their tips pointed downwards. All of them shot toward the volcano which was spewing lava. Qin Mu was dumbfounded. He immediately shouted, "Why aren't you guys running? Are you seeking death?" On the peak, the 3 elders sneered at him as one. "You want to lie to us to swallow the treasure by yourself? Heavenly Devil Cult Master's heart is indeed so evil that it's frightening. If we didn't know Great White Mountain is a place where dragons prosper, we might have just been fooled by you." Qin Mu sighed and rushed away. Great White Mountain Range is built on the dragon's eye of the dragon's vein. However, this dragon's vein is merely the auxiliary dragon's vein of the true Dragon Lord. Not only is it not a place where dragons prosper, it's a place that seizes all fates there. Great White Sword Sect had their fate seized by the dragon's vein for so many years, so their time is probably up. Qin Mu thought to himself. Luckily there are only 100 people in this sword sect, so there won't be a huge disaster. Just as he thought that, Great White Mountain exploded with a bang. The huge volcano was shattered into pieces. The instant it happened, 100 cases sword formation crumbled and countless flying swords were melted in the sky, turning into molten iron. The disciples of Great White Sword Sect were also vaporized before they could even grunt in pain. The cultivation of the 3 elders was extremely high, but under such a terrifying power, it was completely useless. They vomited blood from the shockwave and stumbled backward, only to look at the flying swords which had turned into molten iron falling toward them at a speed that was even faster than before. Despair filled the elders' faces. The molten iron would pierce their bodies and put an end to their lives. Moments before it, they saw a behemoth rising from the debris of the collapsed Great White Mountain. As the Heavenly Devil Cult Master, he actually didn't lie to us. There's really a big one in the mountain. The 3 elders raised their heads to look at the god which was incomparably sturdy. He gradually stood up, and 2 azure and scarlet dragons under his feet let out world-shaking roars. PSSH, PSSH, PSSH. The bodies of the 3 elders burned as they got rained on by the molten iron. Their corpses fell from the sky along with the debris of Great White Mountain, and even the disciples of Great White Sword Sect were deeply buried. The founding master of Great White Sword Sect should have never chosen to found his sect in that place. At that moment, Dragon-rearing Sovereign's body was dozens of times larger than before, like a huge coiling dragon with solid muscles. Under his claws were two huge dragons which carried him as fast as lightning in the direction of Qin Mu. However, there were no signs of the youth in the sky. There were still a few flood dragons hanging on the god's ears, and they crawled into his clothes to hide their heads. Those flood dragons were left behind because they had assisted him in refining the dragon nest. Only due to that was he able to refine the dragon nest at such a fast speed. Dragon-rearing Sovereign's flames torrented into the sky as he looked around, but he still couldn't spot Qin Mu. Flipping his palm over, he took out a jade artifact that was as big as a table. He sneered and said, "Little thing, do you think you can run?" The base of the jade artifact was like a huge round table which had been sliced smoothly. However, on the top of the table there was a semicircular domed roof. Under it, the surface was separated into 9 levels. Each level had numerous jade pillars and jade canine teeth that seemed to be intertwined. On the 9th level, there was a ring-shaped notch that had a gap. This was none other than the dragon nest of the true dragon lord. When Qin Mu had come to the dragon nest, most of its parts had been submerged in the scalding magma. What was revealed in front of their eyes was merely the tip of the iceberg. Dragon-rearing Sovereign had exhausted quite a huge amount of strength to dig out the dragon nest and refine it so that he could bring it away. He then activated the treasure borrowing its borrow to determine Qin Mu's direction. However, the youth seemed to have vanished, and even the dragon nest couldn't sense the true dragon lord. Dragon-rearing Sovereign was astonished. He increased his magic power and activated the dragon nest again, but he still couldn't sense where was the Emperor's disc. He has managed to hide the true dragon lord? No matter where he hides, it's impossible to block the connection between the true dragon lord and the dragon nest. He activated the dragon nest repeatedly, but he still couldn't sense Qin Mu's position. Beads of sweat formed on dragon-rearing Sovereign's forehead. Qin Mu had kidnapped over a dozen of his dragons, and they were all extremely powerful. The red flood dragon that the Dragon King had raised was merely a child compared to his own. They had been raised with meticulous care, and the battle prowess of every single one of them was astounding. If they were truly kidnapped by Qin Mu, his losses would not need to be said. In addition, the purpose of his journey was to find the main dragon's vein of Eternal Peace Empire. If it wasn't gotten rid of, how could he still have the face to return to high heavens? Seems like I can only take out my golden dragon cauldron to cast spell to look for my dragons. Dragon-rearing Sovereign stretched his hand for his Taotai sack, but found nothing there. His face instantly turned charcoal black. He had handed his Taotai sack to Qin Mu so he could feed the dragons. Thus his Taotai sack was naturally in the youth's hands. His golden dragon cauldron was in that Taotai sack. That honest-looking brat. Dragon-rearing Sovereign's teeth creaked from the grinding, and sparks even jumped from his mouth. If I ever meet another honest-looking person, I will definitely tear them to pieces right away. Do you think I won't be able to find you just because you took away my Taotai sack? You are too naive. Dragon-rearing Sovereign raised his hand and pulled out a bunch of hair from his head. Every strand was wavy, not a single one straight. Not only that, his hair even branched out. On every single strand, there were 4 branches which were separated near the 2 centers of the hair. On top of that, when the hair was plucked out from his scalp, the root seemed to give off yawns as though it was a young dragon opening its mouth to breath with sleepy eyes. Dragon-rearing Sovereign chanted for a moment. Then he opened his palm to blow the hair away. They floated up from his hand and actually came to life, transforming into small dragons as they landed on their feet. They grew in the wind, and in the blink of an eye, they had all transformed into black flood dragons that were 10 yards long. They had slim bodies, thighs, necks, and their 4 limbs were all very slender. They sprinted away, covering the mountains and the plains. Since you aren't in the sky, you won't be able to run far. Dragon-rearing Sovereign's face was flickering between dark and clear. He plucked out another bunch of hair and did the exact same thing again, sending hundreds of slender black flood dragons into the distance. He plucked a few more times, pulling out almost all of the hair on his head before stopping. The speed of several thousand black flood dragons was extremely fast. With each one responsible for a radius of a mile, they quickly formed a search area of several thousand miles wide. The black flood dragons could smell dragons, so no matter how the youth hid the Emperor's disc, it would be useless. As long as there were still flood dragons beside him, even the dragon Qin, the black flood dragons would be able to smell them and find his traces. No one has ever fooled me like this. Upon finding you, I'll make you suffer a fate worse than death. In River Shade Country, Qin Mu looked at the wooden chest, still slightly uneasy. He asked, "Can Dragon Rearing Sovereign really not sense anything if Emperor's disc is placed inside here?" He refined the dragon nest, and Emperor's disc is the true dragon lord that was nurtured in that place. So it's very strange. ABA. The person carrying the wooden chest was a well-built old man who looked travel-worn. He waved his hands and grinned. There was no tongue in his mouth. Qin Mu nodded and said, "I know. How would I dare to doubt Grandpa Mute's abilities? I'm just worried that even if this chest will be able to block off the dragon nest, Dragon Rearing Sovereign will still find his way over. He is a god of high heavens who raises dragons well, so they are all extremely powerful. When he was escaping earlier, he had encountered a silver boat flying through the sky like a silver shooting star. He immediately shouted for Grandpa Mute, and he saw the silver boat flying back. Sure enough, Mute had been in it. Qin Mu quickly explained everything to him, and Mute put away his flying boat. It transformed into a pile of silver pellets which landed in a wooden chest. He also made Qin Mu put the Emperor's disc inside. Mute said with concern. "Grandpa Mute, don't underestimate him." Qin Mu's expression became grim as he felt Mute was slightly underestimating the enemy. "That's right, village chief said you went to chase after a ship. What ship was it? Did you manage to catch up to it? I also met a ship and even saw my father on it." The smile on Mute's face vanished, and he seemed to become slightly dejected. He carried the wooden chest without a word. Qin Mu immediately followed after him and said, "Grandpa Mute didn't manage to find that ship?" Grandpa Mute was still dejected. He signaled that the ship had gone to a world in which he couldn't follow. He was beaten back by the strong practitioners of that world. After a moment, a surprised and delighted voice suddenly sounded out. "Human Emperor Qin, why are you here? Your dragon Qilin is indeed remarkable. To actually run ahead of us." Qin Mu looked toward the source of the voice and was slightly stunned. He saw Wang Muran, Long Yu, and Mu Qingdai sitting on a huge buck, hurrying over while looking travel-worn. The dragon Qilin was pleased, and his tail instantly rose straight up like a flagpole. He gave the huge buck of Little Jade Capital a disdainful glance. The huge buck stared with its eyes wide open and its mouth agape. Its little tail that had been sticking straight up immediately fell. With its butt clenching its tail, the huge buck revealed a look of reverence. It then saw the flood dragons of all sizes beside Qin Mu all following the dragon Qilin, and the look of reverence on its face grew even stronger. Qin Mu was astonished. "You guys only came here after 3 days?" He had gone from the capital to Great White Sword Sect before crossing 80 or 90,000 miles to the center of Great Ruins before running back in the same 3 days. However, if he said so, he reckoned that the 3 people wouldn't believe him. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 372. Set Fire. Wang Muran and the rest were very puzzled. When Qin Mu rode the dragon Qilin, the creature had obviously run very slowly, so they never expected him to get ahead of them. Could the dragon Qilin, that glutton, have hidden his abilities and only be pretending to be weak? The 3 stepped forward and exchanged greetings. Long Yu looked much better than a few days earlier. He was no longer cracked and his complexion was better. "This is our blacksmith, Grandpa Mute." Qin Mu introduced Mute to everyone. Mute grinned. He handed the wooden chest to Wang Muran, but Qin Mu immediately shouted, "Don't take it!" Wang Muran was stunned. He didn't stretch his hands out, and Mute pouted. He babbled and grumbled about Qin Mu not understanding how to respect the elderly. Qin Mu didn't explain, for he knew very well how heavy Mute's chest was. If Wang Muran took it, he would definitely be crushed. If Qin Mu had to choose the most mischievous elder in the village, he would definitely vote for Mute. Even though Cripple had scammed of his hawthorn candies ever since he was young, Cripple was only playing with him and would usually return it back to the tearful him after biting a mouthful or two. Mute was thus the most mischievous in the village, his belly overflowing with evil tricks. From young to old, Qin Mu had been tricked countless times by him. The battle that happened 2 days ago has stopped, but we are not sure what happened, Wang Muran said. We were hurrying on our way and could feel the auras of those gods clashing. Based on the direction from where they came, the location should be in the center of Relax Prefecture and Bazhou. He took out a map of Eternal Peace Empire and found Relax Prefecture and Bazhou. He drew a mark at the spot in the center. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. That was where Granny C was staying. The place where those gods fought wasn't far from Granny, so she is probably in danger. His heart was slightly uneasy, but village chief and Hermit Qing Yu had gone there first. Their speed was faster and they should have long arrived at the place. We aren't far from there anymore. There are only about 1,000 miles, so we can reach it in half a day or less, Mu Qingdai said. Qin Mu took out his golden flute and used his vital qi to play it. He said, "There's no need for half a day." A flood dragon's consciousness linked with Qin Mu, and it immediately shook its body to transform into a behemoth that was dozens of yards long. Qin Mu jumped on its back and the dragon Qilin came after. "Come on up, we'll take an hour at most to reach there," Qin Mu said. Wang Muran and the rest were bewildered, but they still jumped onto the back of the flood dragon. The buck also came on and looked at the flood dragon suspiciously before looking at the dragon Qilin who was on its back as well. The dragon Qilin looked down his own nose and paid no attention to the disdainful gaze of the buck. Mute also jumped up with his chest, and the flood dragon, which had been awe-inspiring moments ago, was instantly crushed on the ground. It flailed around like a dead snake, its 4 claws struggling to push it up, digging deep gorges in the ground. But it couldn't get up no matter what. "Grandpa Mute, go down, go down!" Qin Mu immediately shouted out. "You're about to squash it to death." Mute jumped down resentfully and signaled with his hand. Qin Mu's face blushed. "Grandpa Mute, why are you scolding me? I'm not being disrespectful to you. It's your chest that's too heavy. Look, you're scolding me again." Wang Muran and the rest looked at each other in dismay. Qin Mu played the golden flute, and over a dozen flood dragons flew over to lift Mute up. Only then was the old man satisfied. The flood dragons were all extremely strong, equivalent to top-notch existences of the cult master level, so their speed was naturally not slow. Everyone hurried forward at an extremely fast speed, the trees in their passing unable to be seen, just flashing past like shadows. Even mountains passed by them quickly. On the back of the dragon, the buck continued to look at the dragon Qilin with stronger and stronger disdain. It couldn't resist giving a loud sneeze which seemed to be scorning the glutton. The dragon Qilin's tail drooped down as he lowered his head to look at his snout. Qin Mu was rather gratified. Fatty dragon still knows shame, so it's not that he can't be taught. I shall feed him fire element divine vitality pill tomorrow, and he shouldn't pick them out this time. Suddenly, a few black-colored slender flood dragons showed up. Some were climbing on treetops and some were flying in the sky. They raised their heads to look at the flood dragons, then the group they were carrying. Qin Mu swept his gaze around, startled. Strange beasts such as flood dragons are extremely low in number, so why are they everywhere now? Mu Qingdai asked in bewilderment. Those black flood dragons flew up and raised their heads to roar, giving off weird sounds like Maha, Maha. Everyone looked back and saw a swarm of their kin, some good 1,000 of them flying over. They were a dense mass which covered the whole mountain peak. What happened next was that those thousands of black flood dragons jumped, slithered, and flew over in pursuit of them. Qin Mu turned away from them. For someone to use such an ability, it naturally has to be dragon-rearing sovereign. Most of his flood dragons are with me, so where did these black flood dragons come from? They don't look too real. He opened dragon-rearing sovereign's Taotai sack and took out dragon-rearing scripture. After examining it in detail, he saw a sentence which mentioned using dragon qi to nourish one's body. Absorb the dragon qi, refine body into that of a dragon, then circulate the technique to transform. Muscles, hair, and skin. There's nothing that can't be transformed. Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He turned back to look at the black flood dragons that were chasing after them frantically. In that case, these black flood dragons should be part of dragon-rearing sovereign, and since there's such a large number of them, it can only be his hair. As expected of the gods of high heavens, able to even refine one's hair into dragons. Since they are hair, they must be scared of fire. Qin Mu blinked, and the sound of the flute slightly changed. One of the fire dragons carrying Mute slowed down and suddenly lowered its body as it went into the forest below. Qin Mu controlled the other dragons to hurry on their way while the densely packed black flood dragons chased after frantically like a piece of huge black cloud. When the black cloud flew above the fire flood dragon, terrifying true fire swept up from below and instantly covered the radius of several dozens of miles. Countless black flood dragons squirmed as they burned in the true fire. Thick black smoke billowed in the sky, and not long later, the creatures that were dragon-rearing sovereign's hair were completely incinerated. After the fire flood dragon burned all of the black flood dragons, it quickly chased after the group while nodding and wagging its tail. It soon caught up to them and continued to carry the elderly. Mute revealed a look of admiration and gave Qin Mu a thumbs up. The youth smiled bashfully and waved his hand. "Grandpa Mute, don't praise me like this." Wang Muran, Mu Qingdai, and Long Yu stared with their eyes wide open at the thousands of black flood dragons that had been reduced to ashes. Every one of them shuddered. "Muran, you are a good child. Leave the human emperor," Long Yu said secretly. "This person is too demonic." Wang Muran hesitated. "Big senior brother, when you were crazy, he and I already formed an alliance and founded Heaven Alliance. I'm one of the 4 great leaders there, so the 2 of us are on the same ship as of now." Long Yu stared with his eyes wide open and sighed after a while. "You will be brought astray by him." After a moment, dragon-rearing sovereign finally came to the place where Qin Mu had burned his black flood dragons, and his face went black when he saw the ashes that filled the mountain. He was so angry that his hands trembled uncontrollably. Honest-looking brat. Honest-looking brat. There were only a few strands of curly hair left of his head, and they seemed to come to life on their own as they started shivering from fear. "I will definitely not let you off. Even if you go up to heaven or down to hell, I will find you. I will mince your corpse. I will chop you into fine pieces." He plucked out the remaining strands of hair which squirmed in his hand as they struggled to go back into his scalp. It was obvious that the end of their comrades had made them afraid. With a black face, dragon-rearing sovereign blew a breath of dragon qi to transform the strands of hair. They took the shapes of black dragons and sniffed their surroundings. They could smell the scent left behind by the other flood dragons, but they didn't dare to give chase. "What's the use of having you guys?" Dragon-rearing sovereign was furious. He shook his head, and the black flood dragons transformed back into hair and returned to his scalp. Dragon-rearing sovereign sliced his wrist and spilled some fresh blood. The droplets instantly transformed into blood flood dragons to continue searching for Qin Mu's trail. In front is the place where Granny lives in seclusion. Qin Mu stopped playing his flute and looked ahead. At the sight, he couldn't help being stunned. Granny stayed under the foothill that was in the center of Bazhou and Relax Prefecture. Beside the house, there was a clear lake, and it was a very serene place. However, the surroundings were barren and desolate. Because Li Tianqing liked to come out and play around, Granny chose a place that was far from the worldly affairs. However, what appeared in front of Qin Mu and the rest's eyes wasn't a wild and mountainous land. Instead, it was an incomparably luxurious community of palaces that were constructed from gold and jade. The celestial palaces situated near one after another transformed the once wild and mountainous land into a sacred ground for immortals. There were marble pillars carved with dragons and phoenixes, smooth white jade that was laid out on the floor, and incomparably thick golden pillars holding up the roofs that had extraordinary style. The mountains in the surroundings had also went through a transformation. There were strange rocks and weird pines, spirit grass that spread throughout the land, brightly colored flowers, and all kinds of strange and weird strange beasts as well as flying creatures loitering around. Gardens of all sizes were everywhere, and they had spirit herbs that even Qin Mu didn't recognize. Spirit springs, flying waterfalls, crooked footpaths, streams, and brooks also helped to construct the beauty of mountains and rivers that could usually only be seen in ink paintings. Even though everyone in the group was from reputable and big sects and were used to seeing luxury, walking into such a sacred ground still made them feel slightly wretched. They were afraid of dirtying the floor and spoiling the arrangements. Mute revealed a look of suspicion and signaled twice. Qin Mu said in a daze, "I also don't know. It wasn't like this when I was here last. Granny, Granny," he called out twice, but no one replied. Only a few huge fish leaped out of the water, transforming in beautiful women who had human upper bodies and fish lower bodies. They leaned against the fake mountains and sang a soothing song with their charming and gentle voices. Mute gave 2HS and Qin Mu nodded. "It's indeed too luxurious. I also don't know how Granny managed to get all of it." They came to a divine hall whose decorations were simply too exquisite. After entering, they immediately walked out in fear of dirtying the place. Mute walked a couple more steps, then placed down his wooden chest. "Granny isn't here," Qin Mu said to Wang Muran and the rest in bewilderment. "Granny must have left home, so let's just wait here for a moment. If Granny doesn't come back before the sky turns dark, we'll have to leave immediately. We can't stay for even 1 minute. When the sky turns dark, it's definitely not Granny that would come back. It would be the old demon." Tales of Herding Gods. Chapter 373. Heavenly Creator. Could it be that this place will be invaded by the darkness? Why else must we leave before the sky turns dark? Mu Qingdai asked. Qin Mu shook his head, but didn't explain in detail. Everyone was waiting outside the divine hall when the sky suddenly turned dim and thunder could be faintly heard. Qin Mu raised his head to look and the sky that was still clear a moment ago. By then, it was covered with densely packed dark clouds. It was winter season and the weather was cold, so there would rarely be thunder and much less lightning. Yet there were dark clouds and thunder above their heads. The dark clouds became thicker and thicker, slowly covering the entire sky. A heavy shower then started, and everyone hurried to hide under the roof of the divine hall to avoid the icy cold rainwater. The rain shouldn't have been this heavy in the winter season, yet it was pouring heavily over them. The dozen flood dragon also squeezed in under the roof and coiled around the bronze pillars to avoid the heavy rain. The dragon Qilin was taking a nap at the entrance, since he could avoid the rain there. The buck went to the dragon Qilin's side and lowered its head. With its horns, it flung the dragon Qilin out of the hall and took his spot. The dragon Qilin was furious when he got drenched by the rain. He walked back with his mouth opened wide, and the buck jumped up and shook its huge horns, readying itself to fight any time. Steaming water vapor suddenly rose from the ground, and Long Yu stretched his hands out and caught a handful of rainwater. "The water is hot," he said in astonishment. Qin Mu's heart stirred slightly, and he stretched his hands out as well. The rain coming down from the sky was indeed hot. It was as scalding as boiling water. He immediately walked out of the divine hall, and his vital burst forth to split the rainwater to the sides so it didn't land on his body. He raised his head to take a look and saw that the sky had become very dark. In the pitch black above, there was lightning moving through the dark clouds from time to time, and the rumblings of thunder could be heard from 1,000 miles away. It was rolling above them at an extremely fast speed before leaving into the distance. In a split second, the thunder had rolled 2,000 miles forward. It didn't sound like a thunderclap that could be produced by lightning. Wang Muran and the rest also walked out from the divine hall and raised their heads to look. They saw more and more lightning, and when the bolts crossed each other while slicing through the pitch-black clouds, it was very terrifying. The rain falling from the sky became hotter and hotter. "There seems to be something happening in the sky. Fatty Dragon, put that buck down." Qin Mu turned back and shouted out. The dragon Qilin loosed the grip of his jaws and let go off of the buck's neck. The buck was furious and wanted to attack, but it got squashed by the dragon Qilin sitting on top of it, which felt like an immovable mountain rather than a living creature. The thunder in the sky became more and more frequent, as though there was a giant beating onto a war drum. The lightning in the meantime transformed into balls that rolled around, lighting up the darkness. Layers of heavens opened up in Qin Mu's eyes as he looked at the clouds. Suddenly, he could faintly see figures flashing in the sky. Those figures leaped around through the clouds and fought each other. Wang Muran, Long Yu, and Mu Qingdao from Little Jade Capital had also learned spells like the Third Eye or Divine Eye. They all executed their spells to look up and couldn't help crying out in astonishment. Suddenly, the thick and heavy dark clouds were torn apart as a tall and imposing figure appeared in the darkness. He wielded 2 huge knives, and the lightning flashing next to him made him look even more fierce than usual, both excited and sinister. "Grandpa Butcher!" Qin Mu cried out in astonishment. He had seen Butcher's crazy side before, since Butcher frequently went crazy in disabled elderly village. He could even slash village chief when in that mood. He would only reveal a slight tenderness when facing Qin Mu. As his cry of astonishment rang out, a few more figures appeared in the tear in the dark clouds, going straight for Butcher. The dark cloud had been torn by Grandpa Butcher's knives. While Qin Mu realized that, the dark cloud closed and thunder rumbled again. But the constant booming actually didn't come from thunder. It was the loud bangs created from the rapidly moving bodies. Butcher's knives split open the sky, and since they were incomparably hot, they raised the temperature of the clouds to boiling. Thus, the rain coming down became more and more scorching. At that moment, Qin Mu saw a majestic piece of land descend from the sky while passing through the clouds. It had mountains and rivers and was just opposite to the land they were on. It looked like it was going to collide with Eternal Peace Empire, and the sight was astonishing. "ABA," Mute said solemnly. "That's right, it's Village Chief." Qin Mu nodded repeatedly. Village Chief is also above. So who are they fighting? The land in the sky seemed to have met its nemesis as it flew back into the clouds. The mountains and rivers suddenly crumbled to pieces. Qin Mu was stunned. Village Chief's sword skill was broken. Rumble. The sky trembled violently. A pillar that was dozens of yards thick descended from the sky and pierced through the clouds. It seemed like something from heaven coming straight for earth. However, it wasn't a pillar. Instead, it was a frantically swirling current that was like a spear formed by huge water dragons coiling around one another. Someone was gathering water as a spear. Grandpa Blind's spear skill. Qin Mu's mind was blown. The incomparably thick water dragon spear was nothing else but Blind's spear. Blind rarely used a weapon. Even when faced with existences of the cult master level, he usually used a bamboo cane to finish the battle. A bamboo cane was enough for him to break all spells and divine arts in the world. Yet at that moment he had gathered water into a spear, so he should have met a strong enemy which caused him some trouble. With a solemn expression, Mute turned around to walk back into the divine hall. He carried his wooden chest out and pointed at Qin Mu. "Ah, ah, ah." Qin Mu nodded solemnly and said, "Grandpa Mute, don't worry, I will definitely not run around. However, I can also help. I have many powerful flood dragons under me." Mute raised his eyebrows and revealed an expression that looked like he was smiling yet not smiling. Qin Mu blushed and said in a low voice, "They are still powerful though." Mute jumped up, but then he paused 10 yards in the sky and floated motionlessly. Among the heavy rain, blood flood dragons crawled over from all directions and encircled the immortal sacred ground layer after layer. Thump! Mute's feet landed on the ground, and 2 deep footsteps were left behind. The surroundings of the footprints crackled, and the stone slabs exploded, while the farther ones cracked. Mute placed the chest down on the ground, and its lid automatically opened, revealing a chest filled with silver pellets that were the size of a thumb. On Mute's back was a huge furnace which he often used. Yet even after placing the chest, the huge cylinder furnace was not removed. He was still carrying it. The furnace had long been extinguished and was jet black. Mute clasped his hands tightly, and his vital chi burst forth. The furnace behind his back suddenly blazed fiercely with flames. The blood flood dragons stopped in their footsteps. Some of them had been climbing up the railings while others were squatting on stone lions' heads. Some stopped at the stone stairs while others were on the roofs of the halls behind Qin Mu and the rest. The surroundings were under the cover of darkness, but incomparably heavy footsteps could be heard from it. There was also a heavy breathing that was steady yet frantic. The chest before Mute's feet rattled and trembled continuously. The Emperor's disc suddenly flew out and landed in Qin Mu's hand. Mute didn't even turn his head back. He just raised his hand, and his 5 fingers moved as he did a few hand signals. Qin Mu hung the Emperor's disc on his chest and said solemnly, "Grandpa Mute asked us to retreat into the Divine Hall. Fatty dragon, quickly get up. Don't sit on that buck until it dies." The dragon Qilin immediately stood up from the buck, who was sprawled out on all 4. It gasped for breath, its tongue stretched long before it. "Pa!" The dragon Qilin spat a mouth of dragon saliva at the buck. "This glutton is truly wasteful. That's a few bottles of dragon saliva." Qin Mu was furious. The footsteps in the darkness came closer and closer. 2 huge flood dragons came into their view first, their heads as huge as small mountains. Their long necks then showed up, followed by their sharp's claws, and then a pair of feet that were standing on the backs of the 2 flood dragons. The heavy rain filled the air, and the boiling rainwater came down in waterfalls, drenching the gigantic body that was walking out from the darkness. The rainwater cleaned the scales, turning them bright and clear as they reflected the bolts of lightning in the sky. The 2 flood dragons stopped, and a bolt of lightning tore through the darkness, lighting up the gigantic figure. It was Dragon Rearing Sovereign. The Dragon Rearing Sovereign whose head was only left with a few hairs and whose face was as black as charcoal. "You want to block me?" His eyes tore through the darkness like lightning, as if they were 2 beams of light shining on the body of Mute, who carried a blazing furnace of his back. It seemed like he was trying to see everything about Mute. His voice then exploded like thunder. "Just you alone want to stop me? Hand over that honest-looking brat who burned all of my hair, and I will grant you an intact corpse." Mute was stunned and scratched his head. "Grandpa Mute, he meant me." Qin Mu popped his head out of the Divine Hall and said honestly and sincerely, "Dragon Sovereign, I was the one who burned your hair, but I didn't do it on purpose. You asked me to feed the dragons, so I fed them well, and they followed me when I left. Afterward, when I saw your hair giving chase, I found it ugly and insulting to your image, so I took the liberty to burn your 3,000 worries." The corner of Dragon Rearing Sovereign's eyes twitched, but he didn't move his gaze away from Mute. He wanted to do it, but he realized that the instant he looked away, it was highly possible he could receive a fatal blow. "So it's a remnant of founding Emperor era." His gaze landed on the furnace behind Mute and he sneered. "You are a descendant of the heavenly creator of the fake celestial heavens during founding Emperor era, right? The fake celestial heavens conferred your ancestor the title of heavenly creator and let your heavenly workers create Carefree Village. He then had all of you create Permitha Ark to head to Carefree Village, but it didn't manage to sail there. We heavenly gods sealed all of you up, thinking you remnants would die within, but never would I have expected that there would be someone who would manage to escape. Why are you not talking?" Mute was expressionless. He gave a hand signal. Qin Mu popped his head out of the hall and shouted loudly, "Dragon Sovereign, he is calling you a slut." "It's not me scolding you though, it's him." Dragon Rearing Sovereign's face turned even darker. The 2 flood dragons on his ears stretched their bodies secretly and jumped onto his shoulders. They slid down his arms, growing larger and larger. Their scales were like incomparably intricate mechanisms as they flowed and covered his arms. In his clothes, there were 3 more flood dragons slowly growing larger as they coiled around his waist and thighs. Thump! Dragon Rearing Sovereign jumped down from the back of the dragon, and 2 thick dragon claws gripped the ground firmly. The 2 flood dragons that were originally under his feet suddenly shrunk and transformed into 2 truncheons that he grabbed from the ground. "Remnant from the Ministry of Works of the fake celestial heavens," Dragon Rearing Sovereign shouted loudly. His body contorted, and his weird barbaric dragon strength burst forth from his body. With razor-sharp teeth clenched tightly, he swung his truncheons to smash them at Mute. "Prepare to die. Tales of Hurting Gods." Chapter 374. Honest Smile. Dragon-rearing sovereign's body was the corporeal body of a god, and with the addition of 5 dragons coiling around his body and 2 serving as his weapons, his strength multiplied several times. Even though Dragon Rider sect was founded by dragon-rearing sovereign, it only had the abilities to control unusual breeds of dragons and snakes. Its people didn't have the abilities to borrow strength from dragons, but dragon-rearing sovereign's secrets of dragon control could allow one to borrow flood dragon strength for themselves. Besides that, his dragon-rearing scripture didn't contain all the techniques he had, either. He had held back some information. Even though the dragon-rearing scripture in Qin Mu's hand was much more complete than the one passed on to Dragon Rider sect, the most important battle methods were no recorded inside it. When using flood dragons as twin truncheons, his strength was so massive that when he struck, the eardrums of Qin Mu and the rest rang loudly, deafening them for an instant. Not only that strike had emptied out all of the air in the surroundings. It was as if a huge chunk of space had crumbled, and all the air around was sucked away. That was different from the clash of normal strong practitioners. Qin Mu had seen numerous fights between strong practitioners, the struggles between those of cult master level, and even personally witnessed how Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor quelled the rebellion. The impact from their divine arts didn't really collapse inwards but would explode in all directions with destructive force. However, dragon-rearing sovereign's body was so strong that the impact actually caved inwards. There was no excess power leaking out. All of the destructive power was concentrated in one area, allowing his strength to burst forth with no restraint. Even though the impact that burst forth in all directions looked vast and had astonishing destructive power, its energy was scattered. When the divine art hit the opponent, the power had already been weakened by quite some bit. The fact that it didn't happen when dragon-rearing sovereign attacked represented that he had reached extreme control over his strength. It was the beauty of strength, and that kind of beauty could only be admired by the few who had dedicated their lives to studying strength to its extreme. In the palace hall, Qin Mu and the rest didn't have the time to admire. The air in the hall was sucked out, and the group immediately felt an immense pressure as even what was in their lungs was pulled out. The astonishing pressure seemed to be squeezing them, while due to the air having been cleanly sucked away, there was a sense of their bodies trying to expand outwards. Their eyeballs, heart, lungs, bladder were all expanding while their blood and urine nearly flowed out uncontrollably. They got hit by the air which was trying to leave, and their bodies rose into midair against their will. They flailed as they flew toward the truncheon of dragon-rearing sovereign as though they were sending themselves to their deaths. If they were to be sucked under the truncheons of dragon-rearing sovereign, they would be crushed like ants and lose their lives. Qin Mu hurriedly stretched one hand to grab the thick horn of the buck, while his other caught onto Mu Qingdai's hand. The girls' sashes fluttered and coiled themselves around long-used legs, who then grabbed onto Wang Miran. The force pulled the 4 people in a straight line, and the buck's footing started to become unsteady as it tried to dig for purchase into the ground. However, that didn't stop them from floating out of the hall. The huge buck opened its mouth and clamped his teeth onto the dragon Qilin's tail, who felt a sharp pain and growled furiously. No matter how astonishing the pulling force was, the dragon Qilin remained unmovable. Boom! A world-shaking explosion came from outside of the hall. Dragon-rearing sovereign strike had to have unleashed its power to clash with Mute, and the resounding tremor shook the 4 of them violently in midair as though they were struck by countless bolts of lightning. It wasn't exactly what happened, though. When Mute and dragon-rearing sovereign's attacks clashed, the strength of their corporeal bodies had created ripples in space, and it undulated up and down violently. The group who was in the air thus moved up and down as well, suffering from the extreme shaking. Blood leaked out from the corners of their mouths. The ripple in space not only subjected them to the tremors, their bodies also warped along with the space, which resulted in their 5 viscera and 6 bowels shifting to wrong places. Their bones also cracked as they couldn't stand the heavy load anymore. "Too powerful!" the dragon Qilin shouted. "I'm close to vomiting." Qin Mu and the rest were feeling so terrible that they were about to vomit blood. Yet the fat dragon could still speak with plenty of vitality. At that moment, a bright light burst from the outside, and snow-white light dazzled the group's eyes. When brightness reached an extreme level, it would become darkness, even if they had no idea whose divine art it had been that had turned everything in front of their eyes pitch black. Tears flowed out of their eyes, and they immediately executed their pupil divine arts to prevent their eyes from getting damaged. Thump, thump, thump. Their bodies landed on the ground. However, the next moment the ripple from the second collision came over. Luckily, it seemed to be much farther away. Yet the tremors still turned the ground into something similar like the surface of the sea, rising up in waves. Even a glutton like the dragon Qin was bounced up. Pack, pack, pack. There were a few crisp smacks as Qin Mu and the rest were flung against the ceiling. Who's the one who constructed these palaces for Granny? Such sturdiness, grumbled Qin Mu. Blood leaked out from Qin Mu's mouth due to the collision, and he swallowed down the rest that had bubbled up his throat. In the past, great cult master Qin had demolished numerous houses and palaces. When had he ever met one that was so sturdy? The palaces of heavenly devil cults Saint Arrival Mountain had been demolished without much trouble. Even the Imperial Palace, Imperial College, and palaces of Roland's Golden Palace had been demolished when he got his mind to it. What palaces? He had even demolished a dragon vein. However, the palace that belonged to Granny C seemed to be unimaginably durable. When they crashed against the ceiling, their bones almost shattered. Yet the roof didn't have a single crack, let alone signs of it collapsing. The ripple produced by the third clash caused Qin Mu and the rest to fall back onto the ground, piling up together. Mu Qingdai was squashed at the very bottom, followed by Wang Muran, Long Yu, Qin Mu, the Buck, and the Dragon Qilin at the top. Everyone got up in a hurry only to see that the big senior sister of Little Jade Capital had already rolled her eyes. Qin Mu immediately pinched her mouth open and fed her a bottle of dragon saliva. Only then was she rescued. The fourth ripple was even farther away from where they were, but it still wasn't small. The movement in space stretched their bodies up and down, then pulled to the sides and pushed within. When they were stretched to the sides, even Mu Qingdai, who was the thinnest, looked like a plump and round girl in the condensed space. When they were pushed into themselves, even the fattest Dragon Qilin looked very slim. His tummy was gone. When it came to the fifth ripple, its effect was already very small, and everyone finally let out sighs of relief. The fight of immortals could only make mortals suffer. Even though they were the more outstanding ones among the divine arts practitioners, they would die miserable deaths if they were the least bit careless when faced with a clash between such strong practitioners. Maha! Maha! Strange cries came from outside, and Qin Mu, who had just let out a sigh of relief, was once again on tenterhooks. While he took out his golden flute, his sight filled with blood flood dragons jumping down from the roof. Their long limbs landed on the ground, and several hundred creatures encircled the group, blocking them from all directions. Qin Mu played the flute, and the flood dragons coiling around the bronze pillars slowly slithered down to stand guard in front of the hall. Inside, everyone was indescribably nervous. The blood flood dragons transformed from the blood of a god were numerous. On top of that, even the Little Jade Capital had heard about the power of a god's blood. The youths were successors of Eternal Peace Empire's #1 sacred ground, so the secrets they knew were no lesser in number than those that Qin Mu knew. It wasn't the first time Qin Mu had seen the blood of a god or a devil before. He had seen its power when he was with Village Chief in Great Ruins, and he had also seen the lonely mountain ridge root demon who had been nourished by the blood of a god and devil. He had also seen the pool of God's blood left behind from the fight of Imperial Preceptor and a god from high heavens. Yet exactly how strong were the blood flood dragons formed from dragon-rearing sovereign's blood? He had no idea. Even though he had borrowed the golden flute to sense and control the flood dragons, he had no confidence in them blocking the attacks. The most dangerous thing was the peculiar energy contained in the god's blood that formed the blood flood dragons. They moved rapidly outside the hall, leaping here and there. They were like a pack of hyenas, waiting for their chance to strike. Suddenly, a blood flood dragon roared twice, and its brethren pounced into the huge hall in an instant. The sound of Qin Mu's flute rang loudly, and the guarding flood dragons roared as they pounced on the blood flood dragons. The creatures that Qin Mu controlled were incomparably powerful. They were the dragons that dragon-rearing sovereign had spent numerous years raising, so their abilities were extremely high, blocking hundreds of blood flood dragons. Those creatures were shredded by the dozen or so genuine flood dragons, turning into balls of blood mist. Compared to the flood dragons that were raised up by dragon-rearing sovereign, the abilities of the blood flood dragons were still too weak. Outside, the roars gradually quietened down. Only the pattering of rain and the melodious melody of Qin Mu's flute could be heard. The flute quietened down. The pattering of the rain became even more resounding. Everyone in the hall stood with nervous expressions, not daring to relax. They looked out of the hall and saw lightning flash through the sky, bolt after bolt, lighting up the darkness. The expression of Qin Mu and the rest flickered between light and darkness. A flood dragon slowly retreated and moved from the entrance of the hall to the inside. Qin Mu's heart sank. He saw the second flood dragon retreating into the hall, followed by the third, the fourth. The dozen or so flood dragons seemed to have met their nemesis, something that terrified them. They retreated one after another while passing by the group. "Who's outside?" Long Yu croaked. The sound of something satiny rolling around came from the outside. It was followed by heavy footsteps, which sounded as though they were stepping on their hearts as the person got closer, step by step. Qin Mu played his golden flute again, but the dozen or so flood dragons lowered their heads onto the floor, not moving. Cold sweat formed on Qin Mu's forehead, and a tall and sturdy figure appeared at the entrance of the hall, blocking it. That figure belonged to dragon-rearing sovereign who was made purely of blood. When the dragon Qilin saw him, his muscles went limp. He sprawled out on the ground and didn't dare to move. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched. Dragon-rearing sovereign had a natural suppression over flood dragons he had raised. On top of that, there was a kind of special aura about his body which made the dragon Qilin afraid to resist. The blacksmith you called over had truly strong abilities. Dragon-rearing sovereign who was formed by God's blood revealed his crimson teeth. His blood-red eyes stared at Qin Mu when he said coldly, "However, he can't protect you. Little thing, show me another honest smile." Qin Mu forced out a smile and shouted out to the others, "Merely a pile of God's blood. Let's team up and destroy him." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 375, Right and Proper. Not this smile. Dragon-rearing sovereign stared at Qin Mu's face and shook his head. "In the past, your smile was of the kind that could make anyone let down their guard. Even if a knife was in your hand and you stabbed someone in the heart, they would still be unable to put their guard up. Whereas now, you are merely giving me a forced smile, a fake smile. This isn't the honest smile from your heart." Listening to his words, Wang Muran, Mu Qingdai, and Long Yu who were at Qin Mu's side shuddered. Even the huge buck's eyes popped out in fear. They didn't have much interaction with Qin Mu, but they were still considered friends. When they were together with him, it was easy for them to forget that he still had another identity besides that of the human emperor. He was the heavenly devil cult master, the #1 devil of heavenly devil cult. It was simply that it was just too easy to forget about his identities when being around him. No matter if he was heavenly devil cult master or human emperor, they just felt that he was a friend worth making. However, listening to dragon-rearing sovereign's words, they felt chills run down their back. As expected of heavenly devil cult master, no wonder people call him Old Devil. Long Yu thought to himself, the human emperor of this generation is truly hard to pin down. Even a god like dragon-rearing sovereign was at a disadvantage in his hands. Qin Mu shook his head and said, "Dragon sovereign, you made me out to be too scary. I never scheme against my friends." His expression was so sincere that anyone who saw him would find him a reliable person. When Wang Muran and the rest saw that expression, the uneasiness in their hearts vanished. "This is the right one," dragon-rearing sovereign sneered and said, "The sincerity from the depths of your heart. You can still reveal this kind of sincere smile which is even slightly bashful. What a joke! Stealing my dragons in the blink of an eye." His aura suddenly burst forth frantically, raising currents of air to smash forth in all directions. When they hit the walls, loud bangs rang out like raging waves splitting the shore. Qin Mu was astonished. He circulated Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, and his corporeal body became incomparably tense. At the same time, his sword sheath burst open, and Carefree Sword rushed in a blocking position in front of his chest. The next moment, there was a loud bang, and Qin Mu flew backward with Carefree Sword. His feet moved rapidly in the air as he executed Cripple's heaven-pilfering divine legs to get rid of the powerful after effects. However, the strength of Dragon-Rearing Sovereign was simply too great. Even a wondrous technique like heaven-pilfering divine legs wasn't enough to completely get rid of its force. Qin Mu, in the end, couldn't move back anymore and smashed into the wall behind him. Wang Muran, Mu Qingdai, and Long Yu didn't hesitate anymore, and they all made their moves, unleashing their strongest attacks toward Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. The three of them were all disciples of Little Jade Capital, and it used the most traditional way of choosing their disciples. They would first walk through the human world to choose the youths with the best aptitude before observing their character as well as patience, comprehension, adaptability, and other abilities. They would then have to pass numerous tests before being taken in as disciples. The three of them were brought to Little Jade Capital like that, and what they learned were the best techniques and divine arts, thus their cultivation was naturally extremely strong. It could be said that every step they took was extremely solid, and they had nearly no flaws in any realm. On Six Directions realm, there were few that could surpass them. What Long Yu executed was Heavenly Eyes Sword Heart, and 2 trails of sword light shot out from his eyes. One went in a horizontal manner and the other vertical when they slashed toward Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. Mu Qingdai executed strange Dao strict Jia scriptures. It was a kind of technique that cultivated both Taoism and Buddhism. It was quiet like a bodhisattva tree and moved like an immortal traveling. When she raised her hand, 10,000 rays would form a huge palm which would retain its gracefulness. The two of them were skilled in cultivating the techniques of Little Jade Capital, and they had put in a lot of hard work on one technique. Wang Muran, however, had taken a totally different route. Because of his master Wanderer Zhan's death, he pondered about the painful experience and always wanted to take revenge on Eternal Peace Empire. He treated Imperial Preceptor as the enemy in his mind, so he cultivated numerous techniques. He knew that with just Wanderer Zhan's technique alone, he could never surpass Wanderer Zhan no matter how well he cultivated. Yet his master had still died in the hands of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, so he could only open up another path. Only then could he have a chance to surpass Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. Wanderer Qin Yu and the rest also knew what he was thinking, so they took good care of him. They taught him personally and imparted their ultimate arts to him. Thus, even though Wang Muran was the youngest disciple in Little Jade Capital, his abilities were the highest. However, the divine arts from the three of them couldn't touch Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. The god's speed was simply too fast. What they hit was the afterimage left behind after he had already moved. Once the afterimage shattered, only then did they know that their divine arts had missed. Dragon-Rearing Sovereign paid no attention to the three of them and sprinted straight at Qin Mu, who was flying away. His speed was so fast that the trio simply couldn't catch up to him. The buck's footsteps were extremely fast, and its 4 hooves brought him in front of Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. It waved its horns like they were spirit weapons. "Be gone, animal!" After a loud shout, the body of the buck flew away and crashed through a wall into the heavy rain outside. "Open your eyes!" Wang Muran shouted sternly. Mu Qingdai and Long Yu instantly came to a realization. Dragon-Rearing Sovereign's speed was too fast, to the point that their naked eyes could no longer capture his trace. Only by activating pupil divine arts could they only capture his figure. When Dragon-Rearing Sovereign was blocked by the huge buck, his speed had been slightly slowed. But soon, it was raised once again, and the air in the hall was compressed into a wall with his movement. Behind him, Wang Muran and his friends felt a strong suction force pulling them forward, so they just used that force to rush toward Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. Meanwhile, in front of him, Qin Mu swallowed the blood that had come up in his throat. Countless flying swords flew out from his Taotai sack and rushed into the sky. In that instant, he used sword treading mountains and rivers. The first move that village chief had imparted flashed with sword lights. The power of that move had yet to be completely unleashed when the mountains and rivers were shattered. Dragon-rearing sovereign tore through with brute force. Qin Mu's eyes lit up, and carefree sword stabbed forward. He had been waiting for that chance. He was merely on Six Directions realm, and Wang Muran and the rest were the same. The huge buck couldn't defeat the Dragon Qilin, while the Dragon Qilin and the rest of the Flood Dragons were afraid of the aura of Dragon-rearing Sovereign, so they didn't dare to move. Thus, the youths were no match for Dragon-rearing Sovereign. In that case, the only chance to kill Dragon-rearing Sovereign was by using Sword Picture to block his vision and having Carefree Sword attack from behind it in an ambush. The instant Dragon-rearing Sovereign broke through Sword Picture, it was the time for Carefree Sword to stab him to death. Qin Mu couldn't defeat him in an open fight, so he could only scheme. The moment Dragon-rearing Sovereign destroyed the first move of Sword Picture, he saw a cold light coming his way. He hurriedly raised his hand to block the heart of his brows, but Carefree Sword pierced through his palm. It went past his forehead and sliced through his brain. Carefree Sword, the divine sword of Qin Hanjin, just the sharpness of the sword was something that one couldn't defend against. Dragon-rearing Sovereign was stunned, and Carefree Sword behind him changed direction to stab his heart from the back, until its tip came out from his chest. Qin Mu burst forth with all his magic power. He guided the divine energy inside the sword and shouted at the same time. 8,000 swords rose into the sky and fell toward Carefree Sword. In an instant, Dragon-rearing Sovereign vanished, replaced by a huge, round sword pellet. The sword handles interlocked with each other, making it airtight. They seemed like a huge golden ball that was so round it was flawless. Qin Mu let out a sigh and spat out the blood in his mouth. Wang Muran and the other two reached him and saw the huge round ball, then also sighed in relief. At that moment, the circular ball suddenly moved, and cracks appeared on its sides. It was caused by the sword handles loosening, and it was a sign that the sword pellet was breaking apart. "Quickly dodge!" Qin Mu shouted out and ran out of the hall frantically. Wang Muran and the rest immediately turned when they saw the situation. Behind them, the huge sword pellet burst open with a loud clang as the flying swords shot off in all directions. The imposing figure of Dragon-rearing Sovereign appeared in the center of all the flying swords, his gaze freezing cold. There was only a small pool of spoiled blood from when the divine blood was hit by the divine energy hidden inside Carefree Sword to mark the earlier attack. The strike from Qin Mu had been pretty sinister and terrifying. If Dragon-rearing Sovereign hadn't covered his body with a pool of blood, he would have died right there and then, under the sword of the crafty brat. The bodies of Qin Mu and the rest flashed as they tried to avoid the sword lights that were shooting over from behind them. The swords were concentrated and there were as many as 8,000 of them, and the sword lights were rushing many times faster than when Qin Mu had executed his sword with his full power. Kai! Mu Qingdai was pierced by the sword lights and nailed to a bronze pillar. Even though she was a proud disciple of Little Jade Capital, had extremely powerful cultivation, and cultivated body techniques, she couldn't help it when there were that many flying swords and the sword's light were that fast. She didn't manage to avoid all of them completely. Luckily, those swords were Qin Mu's, and Dragon-rearing Sovereign only had the strength of the corporeal body. There was no magic power in his body, so he couldn't execute the power of Qin Mu's flying swords to fatally injure the group. Even so, Mu Qingdai was severely injured. Just when she got hit, Long Yu and Wang Muran's cries could be heard. One of them was nailed to the wall while the other to the ground. Qin Mu grunted as a sword light pierced through his chest. He moved his heart and the sword missed his vitals by a narrow margin. He got nailed to the beam of the palace's door and hung high in the air. Outside the hall, the buck rushed in and got hit by dozens of swords in a split second, which threw it back. "Don't you just want the true Dragon Lord? I'll give it to you." Blood was leaking out from the corners of Qin Mu's mouth when he gritted his teeth to circulate his vital qi. The Emperor's disc flew out of his Tao Tai sack, and he threw it to Dragon-rearing Sovereign while shouting sternly, "You can kill me, but let my 3 friends go." The disciples of Little Jade Capital were moved. Long Yu thought to himself, "I held prejudice against human emperor when he is so loyal to his friends. I only thought about how he is heavenly devil cult master. That emperor's disc flew toward dragon-rearing sovereign, having already transformed into the shape of a dragon jade. Numerous writings, runes, and pictures flowed and transformed on its body continuously, creating a marvelous image. True dragon lord. Dragon-rearing sovereign became excited, and he raised his hand to catch the emperor's disc. He sneered, "True dragon lord was originally mine, so even if you didn't hand it over, I could have still gotten it after I killed you." His face changed, and he immediately shook his hand to throw the emperor's disc away. He shouted sternly, "You poisoned it!" His body began to dissolve, becoming shorter rapidly, like an ice cube which had landed on a hot plate. Below his feet was a pool of spoiled blood which was quickly growing. Dragon-rearing sovereign cried out as his body started to blister. Those blisters popped and out came the heads of tiny flood dragons which opened their mouths to shriek. They struggled to escape and a few actually managed to do it. However, some of them did it with half of their bodies, the other half having dissolved. Wang Muran and the rest were in a daze. Their minds went blank from the revelation. Qin Mu pulled at the sword holding him nailed with force, but the door beam was too hard, so he couldn't even budge the blade. When he realized it, he immediately gave up on the action and stretched his hand to smack the beam. With a chi sound, the sword penetrated through his body, and he dropped to the ground. Qin Mu stood up, and his eyes brimmed with tears from the pain. He hurriedly poured some bottles of dragon saliva on his wounds and said in a just and forceful manner, "If I can't win, of course I will use poison." Wang Muran and the rest were stunned once again. Qin Mu said those words as though using poison when he couldn't defeat an enemy was right and proper. He made it sound as if it was as simple and obvious as eating and sleeping. The people who taught this human emperor don't seem to have been good people. Long you thought. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 376. Fight to the death. Using poison when one couldn't win was a despicable thing in most people's eyes. This was the main reason why Jade-Face Poison King had infuriated numerous people back in the day. However, this kind of thing had no psychological effect on Qin Mu. In his eyes, poisoning someone when one couldn't defeat them was something that was right and proper. Poisoning the opponent was also an ability. His logic went along the lines of, "If I can't fight you yet you still come to beat me, poisoning you is a fitting answer." For example, what they faced was not a fair fight from the start. Dragon-rearing sovereign was a god of high heavens that was high above, so the clone that was formed by his fresh blood also had extremely high abilities. Even strong practitioners of celestial being realm wouldn't be a match for it, let alone Qin Mu and his companions. The opponent was a god, so poisoning him was a normal fight-back method. The poison Qin Mu had used was the 3-break powder he had created when he fought with poisoner Mu Yingxue of West Earth, who had given the poison its name. It was lucky that he had good habits. Every time he refined a poison or a medicine, he would usually make more so that he would still have half left to keep after putting it to use. Who knew if he might come to need it in the future? Thus, what Qin Mu had spread on the Emperor's disc was none other than 3-break powder. It flipped the 5 phases and messed up the yin and the yang, causing the body to break down, along with the spirit and soul. That was why the poison was called 3-break powder. By using great supplement to nourish itself, it created an incomparably marvelous poison. That kind of poison had been used specifically to deal with the blood of a god and devil in Lonely Mountain Ridge Root Demon. Therefore, it was only right to use it to deal with Dragon-rearing Sovereign's body of blood as well. Back then, Lonely Mountain Ridge Root Demon had been fixed in place by the green dragon bead and couldn't move, so it was easily poisoned. However, Dragon-rearing Sovereign was free to move, so Qin Mu had spread 3-break powder on the Emperor's disc. As long as Dragon-rearing Sovereign touched it, he would be poisoned. Numerous pocket-sized blood flood dragons squirmed in all directions to avoid the Emperor's disc and the spoiled blood, then tried to gather back together. Qin Mu immediately rushed to them while shouting, "If we don't get rid of this god's blood cleanly, none of us will live." His 8,000 flying swords filled the hall, but with his cultivation, he couldn't summon all of them back. His vital chi instead transformed into a thread to sweep up Carefree Sword which was nailed in the pillar, pulling it out. Carefree Sword was a divine sword that was incomparably sharp. Even though it was embedded deep into the pillar, it could still be pulled out, unlike the other swords. Qin Mu gathered his remaining vital qi and executed all kinds of basic sword forms toward the blood flood dragons that were running around on the ground. Long Yu grunted. He couldn't pull out the flying sword in his chest, either. So having learned from Qin Mu's demonstration, he smacked the handle forcefully, and the flying sword went through his chest. Long Yu let out a blood-curdling scream from the pain, then gritted his teeth. But right then, 2 jade bottles flew over. Qin Mu had thrown him some dragon saliva. The youth caught them in a hurry and didn't even have the patience to open the corks. He crushed the 2 jade bottles with force so the dragon saliva would flow out, then used his vital qi to send it to his wound. The effect of the dragon saliva was swift, as the flesh on his chest started to grow back. Felt painful and itchy. Long Yu didn't have the time to care about the immense pain in his chest. He pounced forward to kill the small blood flood dragons that were running randomly in all directions. Wang Muran and Mu Qingdai also did the same thing to break free, losing flesh and blood in the process. Qin Mu threw 2 bottles of dragon saliva to each of them as well, and the 2 of them immediately poured them onto their wounds. If it was under normal circumstances, they would have used their vital qi to force out the clotted blood to prevent any hidden damage, but they had no time to care about that. They controlled their spirit weapons to slaughter the small and delicate blood flood dragons. "Don't step on the spoiled blood," Qin Mu shouted out to them in warning. "The poison I had refined is too strong, so even I can't detox it." The 3 were frightened and immediately became more careful, avoiding the spoiled blood on the ground. The 4 leaped up like rabbits and soared down like falcons as they cut the blood flood dragons one by one. However, their power was still not enough to eradicate all of them, as they were formed by a god's blood. After the dragons were killed, they would instantly reconstruct themselves. Only Qin Mu's carefree sword was able to eradicate a portion of the god's blood. "Lend me your magic power and let's activate this sword together." Wang Muran and the rest immediately roused their vital qi and transformed it into threads that flew toward Carefree Sword. With their magic power pouring in, its power instantly rose drastically. Qin Mu controlled Carefree Sword, and his sword skills burst forth, slicing off the heads of all the flood dragons that were running around. The sword light then suddenly changed to drill sword form as it traveled on the ground like a silver dragon, shredding all the headless bodies. A few of the creatures hugged themselves and rolled on the ground, avoiding the sword light. When the small and delicate dragons stopped, they vanished, and in their place stood Dragon Rearing Sovereign, who was only a foot tall. "Dragon Rearing Sovereign, serves you right." The 4 were both surprised and delighted. They couldn't help laughing out loud. Suddenly, the small and compact Dragon Rearing Sovereign took a step forward, and his body vanished. The tibia bone of Long Yu's left leg cracked from the kick of the small Dragon Rearing Sovereign. "Eyes awaken!" Wang Muran shouted out and awakened his divine eyes, but he could only see the small Dragon Rearing Sovereign moving rapidly. He flashed around like a phantom, to the point it was nearly impossible to capture his figure. Qin Mu executed Carefree Sword to stab over and over again, but his sword kept missing the back of the little one by a narrow margin. It was completely impossible to hit him. "Senior sister, be careful." Just as Wang Muran called out his warning, Dragon Rearing Sovereign appeared beside Mu Qingdai like a phantom and punched her. Mu Qingdai shouted loudly, and her sashes coiled around the arm of the small Dragon Rearing Sovereign while she retaliated with a palm strike. Qin Mu arrived and executed Overlord Body 3 Elixir Technique while circulating 9 Transformation 3 Conditions Mystery Technique. His body rapidly shrunk, and he became a small human that was 1 foot tall. Carefree Sword had also become 3 inches long, and he controlled it to attack Dragon Rearing Sovereign. "Don't clash with him head-on. His strength is immense." Bang! Fresh blood burst out from Mu Qingdai's palm, which got mangled. Qin Mu moved rapidly in the air and used qi to control his sword to attack Dragon Rearing Sovereign. The small god avoided Carefree Sword with phantom-like speed. Wang Muran gathered his qi into a net and tried to capture the small Dragon Rearing Sovereign, but was blasted away. Long Yu stood up on one leg and hopped to Mu Qingdai's side, allying himself with Qin Mu and the rest to attack dragon-rearing sovereign. His body is too small, which makes it hard to attack. Shrink your bodies, shouted Qin Mu. Mu Qingdai executed a technique from strange Dao strict Jia technique, and her body instantly shrunk. She became a 1-foot girl whose hair dragged behind her. On the other side, Wang Muran also shrunk his body and became a tiny thing. Only Long Yu did not cultivate any such techniques, so he could only stand on one leg and put his guard up. He executed Heavenly Eyes Sword Heart, and sword lights shot out from his gaze. They moved as the 4 tiny ones moved, but even though his sword eyes were fast, it was still hard for them to capture dragon-rearing sovereign's small and delicate body. He could only see 4 tiny things rushing around in the sky, flashing here and there. Too fast. This is bad. Long Yu saw dragon-rearing sovereign rushing toward him and hurriedly hopped up with a single leg. The instant he did so, he heard a crisp sound and looked down to see his other leg bending at an unimaginable angle. Crap, he thought. Bad hump. Long Yu fell to ground in a kneeling position, the pain almost making him faint. Dragon-rearing sovereign's body appeared behind his head, and the tip of his foot was aimed straight for the undefended target before it. If he managed to land the kick, Long Yu's head was definitely going to explode, but at that moment, Carefree sword that was 3 inches long flashed past and pierced dragon-rearing sovereign's foot, and the kick missed. Long Yu let out a sigh of relief and ruthlessly turned his neck 180 degrees backward. Sword lights burst forth from his eyes and stabbed dragon-rearing sovereign's body, blowing him away. I've tried my best, Long Yu shouted. He collapsed on the ground, almost breaking his neck from the twist. Dragon-rearing sovereign flew backward as his feet tapped repeatedly in the air to get rid of the power of the 2 swords. His body was made of fresh blood, so he didn't have any magic power and could only rely on the strength of the corporeal body to deal with Qin Mu and the rest. However, the exhaustion of the god's blood was also quite astonishing. He had no choice but to use the moves of corporeal body divine arts to win. Suddenly, a huge black figure appeared at the door of the hall. The buck, which was covered in swords, climbed up and shook its head. Its horns flew off the head, and one of the small branches stabbed into the back of dragon-rearing sovereign's heart. Dragon-rearing sovereign's body exploded, countless balls of blood rolling away, and the god became even smaller than he was before. He jumped up from the horns and landed on the bare head of the buck. He punched down, trying to smash in the head of the huge buck. Qin Mu sent his sword over. Dragon-rearing sovereign avoided it, but saw 3 small humans land one after another on the buck's head. The huge buck blinked eyes and revealed a look of terror. With the 4 small humans scuttling here and there on his body, his bones crackled as though they were going to be broken. You! The huge buck cried out in astonishment and hurriedly rushed toward the dragon Qilin, who was lying in the corner of the huge hall. He tried to push the trouble onto the dragon Qilin's body. There were also over a dozen flying swords stabbed into the dragon Qilin's body, but his muscles and bones were limp. He had a natural fear of dragon-rearing sovereign, which was why he hadn't moved for the whole time. The other flood dragons were sprawled beside him, and some of them were hit by the swords as well. However, they all lay still, not daring to move. It was good that the dragon Qilin's skin was rough and his flesh was thick. With fat surrounding his whole body, there wasn't much of a problem even if he was stabbed by over a dozen swords. Don't come over, groaned the dragon Qilin weakly. The huge buck was about to reach him when cracking sounds came from his body. It twisted, and his limbs snapped, causing him to collapse to the ground and slide forward. The dragon Qilin exhausted all of his strength to turn his body around and crawl away from the buck. The other flood dragons also shifted on the floor and crawled in the other direction with difficulty. The intimidation of dragon-rearing sovereign was simply too strong, making them unable to resist. Suddenly, Mu Qingdai flew backward and crashed into the dragon Qilin, who was crawling away with all his strength. She fainted. Dragon-rearing sovereign rushed over, wanting to claim Mu Qingdai's life, and the dragon Qilin went totally limp, paralyzed on the ground. Qin Mu grabbed Carefree sword and shouted loudly, "Brother Muron, Wang Muran puked out fresh blood as he exerted all his strength to lift Qin Mu up and toss him over. Qin Mu's footsteps tapped repeatedly as he rushed over as fast as lightning. The sword light of the 3-inch sword in his hand rose drastically, and a piece of small and delicate green mountains and blue water poured out from the sword light, drowning dragon rearing sovereign. Clanging sounds rang non-stop, and sword-treading mountains and river suddenly fell apart. Only the figure of Qin Mu wielding his sword and pouncing over was left. The body of dragon rearing sovereign was even smaller, and beneath his feet was even more spoiled blood. He alternated between his fingers and palms to smack carefree sword continuously, and powerful jolts traveled through Qin Mu's body, forcing him to puke blood repeatedly. He thus transformed into a shadow to move along the floor, but dragon rearing sovereign gave a punch and blew him out from the ground. Wang Muran shouted loudly, and his hair fluttered in the wind as he rushed over. 2 small humans fought fiercely, and among the sparks, the sound of bones breaking could be heard as Wang Muran flew backward. Qin Mu lay on the ground and used the last of his strength to raise his sword to stab downwards. Dragon rearing sovereign, who was 2 inches tall, clasped his hands about carefree sword, using all his strength to withstand it. Qin Mu's sword instantly couldn't continue, and he shouted fiercely, "Fatty dragon, do you still want to eat? If I die, you will have to starve to death." The dragon Qilin's eyes were filled with fear when he looked at the tiny dragon rearing sovereign in a daze. But when he heard the sentence, he suddenly gave a fierce roar and raised his claw to smack down the sword's hilt. Kai! The sword light pierced through dragon rearing sovereign, and he who was 2 inches tall was split into half. The fresh blood was still squirming and wanted to flow together, but the dragon Qilin gave a furious roar. With magic power flooding into the sword light increased sharply and exploded in all direction. The last of the god's blood withered into spoiled blood and fell lifeless to the ground. Qin Mu was stunned. The strength of his body withdrew like a tide, and his hands that were holding onto the sword loosened. He collapsed on the ground. The dragon Qilin continued to roar fiercely. He raised his claws, wanting to smack once more the sword again, but Qin Mu said weakly, "Stop smacking. If you smack some more, I might just die as well." He coughed violently. His magic power was completely exhausted, and his corporeal body gradually returned back to its normal size. He wanted to crawl up to treat his own injuries, but he couldn't move at all. The dragon Qilin climbed to his feet and looked at the bloodstains on the ground. He then looked at the surroundings and saw the flood dragons that were incomparably powerful not daring to look him in the eyes. Their heads were lowered, their eyes filled with fear. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 377. A God Has Fallen. Qin Mu, Wang Muran, Mu Qingdai, and Long Yu were all severely injured and couldn't move. Long Yu's legs were broken. Mu Qingdai had fainted from severe injuries. Wang Muran nearly had all his bones shattered, and Qin Mu's most severe injury was the punch he received when he was a shadow. It had nearly shattered him when he was in the shadow form. The 4 of them just lay on the ground. Long Yu's tongue was stuck, his neck crooked. He had twisted it himself, and it had nearly broken it. He could only look helplessly at the dragon Qilin walking over and stretching out his long tongue to slobber all over him. The dragon Qilin flipped him over and licked him once more. Long Yu got turned over, but his tongue still didn't retract. The dragon Qilin licked him again, covering the whole person in drool. His body became itchy. It was the itch of broken bones growing back, his tendons reconnecting, and his flesh growing back. He executed his vital qi and used it to adjust the bones to prevent them from reattaching themselves in a crooked way. If he didn't do that, he'd end up with problems in moving even if his injuries were healed. Wang Muran, who had collapsed a bit farther away, couldn't help giggling when he saw how his senior brother was covered in drool. The huge tongue of the dragon Qilin kept flipping him over and over as though he was scared of the man being burnt. The youth laughed until his wounds opened up. The pain made tears roll down his face. The dragon Qilin walked over to him and stretched out his long tongue, and Wang Muran could no longer laugh. He saw the dragon Qilin's tongue cover his face like a slimy carpet. It then flipped him over and over again. After the dragon Qilin was done with Wang Muran, He also licked Mu Qingdai, who was unconscious, and made the girl all wet. Mu Qingdai woke up from the licking and could only remain acting unconscious to spare herself the embarrassment. The dragon Qilin walked towards Qin Mu, but he said weakly, "Don't lick me. Senior brother Long Yu, how are your injuries? There are some jade bottles in my Taotai sack that contain dragon saliva. It will be fine if you just take them out and spread it over my wounds." "Lick him. Big F, dragon. You must lick him," Long Yu immediately shouted. Wang Muron nodded repeatedly and added in a shout, "We all got licked, so how could we let him off? Big dragon, lick." Mu Qingdai also opened her eyes in a hurry, no longer acting like she was sleeping. She smiled and said, "To enjoy blessings and endure misfortune together, boss dragon, lick." Qin Mu's expression changed drastically. He wanted to crawl away, but the dragon Qilin raised his claw to press down on the corner of his pants. Qin Mu couldn't move and became furious. "Fatty dragon, there's poison on my body. If you lick me, you will die by bleeding from all your orifices." The dragon Qilin hesitated for a moment, and the three disciples of Little Jade Capital laughed. "Who will apply poison on their body? Fatty dragon, just lick him to your heart's content. We will bury you if you die from poison." The dragon Qilin was finally at ease. He licked Qin Mu until he was upside down and totally drenched him. The youth was his meal master, so he naturally had to be more attentive. He licked Qin Mu more carefully than the others. Qin Mu's face was black when he got flipped around. He didn't move nor struggle, seemingly having accepted his fate. The dragon Qilin pulled back his tongue. When he saw Qin Mu's hairstyle that was messed up by him, he hurriedly licked it smooth for Qin Mu until it was slick and shiny. "Enough, fatty dragon," Great Cult Master Qin said sternly. "Enough. Stop licking. It's fine now, it's very smooth already. Stop licking." The dragon Qilin saw that he was furious and pulled his tongue back reluctantly. His front claws rested on his hind legs as he squatted nearby. Qin Mu had a stubborn strand of hair that hung down to the corner of his left eye. The dragon Qilin hesitated for a moment, then took a glance at Qin Mu's face. It was black as charcoal. But the dragon Qilin couldn't resist it and quickly stretched out his tongue to lick the strand of hair back in place. Qin Mu went into a frenzy. The huge buck on the ground laid with all his legs shattered. When Qin Mu and the rest transformed into small humans to fight with dragon-rearing sovereign, they had tormented the buck quite a bit. Luckily, its life hadn't been endangered. It's just that his injuries were quite heavy. When the buck saw the dragon Qilin curing Qin Mu's injuries, he immediately pouted and shouted, "Hey, hey, fatty, lick me, bah!" The dragon Qilin spat a mouthful of dragon saliva in front of the huge buck and said arrogantly, "Rub it on yourself." The huge buck was furious, but healing himself was more important. He could only move his body with difficulty to rub the dragon saliva on his wounds. All throughout it, he kept twitching from pain. The dragon Qilin looked at him rubbing himself in his saliva and felt delighted. "This damned buck keeps putting me down in front of my meal master, not leaving me any face. Now I shall let him know how powerful I am and humiliate him in front of his meal master." Fatty Dragon instantly felt that the happiest moment in his life wasn't when he had hugged the young patriarch's leg to beg for a meal, but the one right then. Qin Mu and the rest gradually recovered some strength and all sat up to mobilize their vital qi. They forced the clotted blood in their bodies out to prevent any hidden injuries from being left behind. The three from Little Jade Capital had also learned the art of healing before, and their abilities weren't weak. It was only when compared to Qin Mu that they were lacking. There were many places in which they weren't meticulous. Qin Mu pushed the clotted blood out from his body and mobilized his vital qi to squeeze his shattered bones bit by bit out of his body. With a low shout, his primordial spirit flew out to check on his limbs and bones, examining the situation of his body as well as the injuries on his divine treasures. He examined them in incomparably fine detail, and his primordial spirit returned back to his body. He consumed a few spirit Buddha pills to quickly replenish his spirit and raise his vital qi. He then took medication according to his symptoms and refined pills to cure his hidden injuries. Primordial spirit. Mu Qingdai gasped, and astonishment spread across her face. Wang Muran and Long Yu's mind were also blown. Primordial spirit was not something that could be cultivated at Qin Mu's realm, so they would have never thought to see Qin Mu actually execute it. Even though Qin Mu's primordial spirit was still weak and small, looking like a faint shadow, it was indeed his primordial spirit. Qin Mu cultivating the primordial spirit on Six Directions realm meant that he held an advantage in cultivation. His speed would be much faster than that of the others. Primordial spirit was also one of the more important battle methods after Celestial Being realm. Since he was already in contact with it, the raising of his abilities was really important. Just then, Qin Mu had awakened the eyes of his primordial spirit to check on his own body. What puzzled the group though was that they didn't know how he had cultivated it. Human Emperor is truly powerful. I'm completely won over. Long Yu sighed and said, to be able to cultivate primordial spirit on Six Directions realm, and even make his primordial spirit leave his body, Human Emperor's aptitude and comprehension are indeed the first in this world. Qin Mu shook his head and walked toward Mu Qingdai to examine her body. My comprehension and aptitude aren't the first in the world. Cultivating a primordial spirit on Six Directions realm isn't anything remarkable, either. Sister Yushio has also cultivated it. It's actually not hard to cultivate the primordial spirit. Sister Yushio and I cultivated it carelessly and our primordial spirits just left our bodies, he said. Speechless, Long Yu shook his head. The sixth princess of Eternal Peace Empire has also cultivated the primordial spirit? Eternal Peace Empire is truly not to be underestimated. There are truly many experts in the younger generation. If I shut myself in Little Jade Capital, I may just fall behind times, Wang Muran said with awe. He began to worry. There were many divine techniques in Little Jade Capital, and any of the ultimate arts would be enough to start a sect if taken out. But with Eternal Peace Empire's reform blazing like wildfire, the skills changed and the paths also changed. Divine arts would evolve accordingly too. If Little Jade Capital didn't catch up with the reform, they would definitely be eliminated. Qin Mu and Sixth Princess Ling Yushio cultivating their primordial spirits on Six Directions realm together was just one of the signs of the reform. Qin Mu and Ling Yushio did not know how great of an impact this act of theirs would have on other cultivators. If they could find the way to cultivate the primordial spirit so early and spread it, they would be acclaimed as grandmasters, gaining high positions in the history of cultivation. They would definitely be placed on the same level as Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and may even surpass him. Imperial Preceptor founding the three other basic sword forms was also one of the signs of reform, and it established his accomplishments of a grandmaster. On top of that, the importance of cultivating the primordial spirit on Six Directions realm was even greater than that of the three basic sword forms. It would benefit all divine arts practitioners from Six Directions realm and upwards, allowing their cultivation on every realm to increase drastically. Wang Muran told Qin Mu his idea, and Qin Mu was stunned. He said, I had not thought about this. However, what you said is very logical. When I'll return to the capital, I will discuss this with Sister Yushio. We might just be able to discover how it came to be. He used Cyan Heaven's eyes to examine the ins and outs of Mu Qingdai's body and checked on all the hidden injuries. He then refined spirit pills for her. Mu Qingdai was slightly bashful from his penetrating gaze. He's a divine physician. He's a divine physician. She kept repeating to herself in her head. She then heard divine physician Qin muttered softly, the structure of a woman's body seems to be different from that of a man. If they don't have that thing, how do they pee? Mu Qingdai's face went red, and she glared at him. Qin Mu hurriedly went over to check on Long Yu's injuries, and after some time, he finished treating the injuries of his companions. The dragon Qilin wobbled over and mumbled, Cult Master, look at the swords in my body. There were still over a dozen flying swords stuck in his body. Qin Mu took a glance at him and sneered. Is my hair still messy? All the strands are neat. Wait a minute. This strand of hair is messy. Just as the dragon Qilin stretched his tongue out, Qin Mu raised his arm and signaled with his fingers. The dozen or more flying swords flew out of the dragon Qilin's body at once, and pillars of blood spurted out. The dragon Qilin screamed miserably. "Try licking again," Qin Mu told him ruthlessly. Even though he said so, he still took out bottles of dragon's saliva to quickly pour it on the wounds. He used his vital qi to help squeeze out the clotted blood, then sealed his wounds. The dragon Qilin tried to curry favor and said, "Cult Master, now that I've done a great merit, my rations." Qin Mu ignored him and went to the huge buck, which was in a much worse shape than the dragon Qilin. There are 3 times as many swords in its body, and it still had to roll around in the saliva on the ground. Qin Mu shook his head and helped the huge buck set his bones back in place. He then took over a dozen bottles of dragon's saliva to help him stop the bleeding before pulling out the flying swords. Wang Muron's injuries were much better. He picked up the buck's horns back and ran over to stab them back into its head. "Young master, the horns are inserted wrongly," the buck told him. "Oh!" Wang Muron immediately pulled the horns out again, causing blood to spurt. The buck exhaled in pain, and Wang Muron immediately turned the horns around to stab them back in. He asked Qin Mu for a bottle of dragon's saliva to pour on the wound. Qin Mu then treated the injuries of the flood dragons. After being busy for half a day, the sky outside suddenly turned snow white. The next moment, though, it became pitch black with lighting flashing again. Everyone looked outside in a hurry and saw that the heavy rain had stopped. A tear could be seen in the sky as though a huge sword had sliced it open. "This is..." Qin Mu's heart trembled violently as he muttered, "Sunshot divine cannon." Trails of red lines came down from the torn sky, and Qin Mu raised his hand to catch one. However, his complexion changed suddenly, and he hurriedly avoided it. The trails of red lines pitter-pattered on the palaces in front of them. Wherever they landed, flowers bloomed throughout the mountains while the grass and trees grew frantically. God's blood fell from the sky as though heaven was grieving. A god had fallen. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 378. Enforcing Justice on Behalf of Heaven. The blood rain wasn't heavy, and the area covered wasn't vast. It landed just on the foothills where the group resided. Qin Mu saw numerous trees and flowers growing at an astounding speed. The trunks were tall and verdant while the spiritual air in the surroundings was so dense it seemed to be on the verge of materializing, floating around the trees like ribbons. Among the flowers, there was a milky white fog which made them look abnormally bright and tender. After the long rain, the lake, moat, and river were all filled up, and numerous fishes grew frantically, transforming into fish monsters like those in great ruins. Some of them grew legs and jumped onto the shore. When they opened their mouths to catch the raindrops, razor-sharp teeth could be seen. The bodies of the auspicious beasts in the mountains also expanded, and all kinds of bone spikes pushed out, making them look terrifying. The mermaids in the lake had also become abnormally huge, and their once beautiful faces had become strange. The energy in the god's blood was too great, transforming all the life forms into misshapen monsters. That kind of growth couldn't be controlled, and the places which had been touched by the blood rain first would usually grow more than other places. The land and insects were also living things, so when they got drenched by the blood rain, the foothill transformed into a place reminiscent of great ruins. In Qin Mu's eyes, it was the powerful qi of yin and yang, for symbols, and 5 phases which had changed the balance in the bodies of the various life forms, resulting in the abnormal transformations. But it was different from his home. Most of the strange beasts in great ruins had the bloodlines of gods and devils, which were hereditary. The strange beasts in the foothills, however, had been transformed by the powerful energy in the god's blood. Which god fell? Is it that dragon-rearing sovereign? Mu Qingdai asked in a low voice. Outside the huge hall, the entire mountain was covered with multicolored lights and white fog, decorating the place as if it was a sacred ground. However, if they walked into the blood rain, they would probably transform like the life forms in the mountain. If they weren't drenched directly, they could cultivate under the roof and absorb the powerful divine energy outside. That, to a divine arts practitioner, was definitely a sacred ground for cultivation. Based solely on the spiritual and divine energies, the 3 big sacred ground of Eternal Peace Empire were much inferior. After all, no matter if it was heavenly devil cult, Tao sect, or Great Thunderclap Monastery, none of them would be able to kill a god to nourish their sacred ground. Granny had decided to stay in this desolate land to keep Li Tianxing here, but she would never have expected this place to become a sacred ground for cultivation, right? Qin Mu had a weird expression. He used carefree sword to carefully catch a drop of God's blood and examined it. He then shook his head. This isn't dragon-rearing sovereign's blood. His blood is dragon's blood, but the divine energy here isn't such. His expression became even weirder after he said that. I've seen this blood before. Qin Mu lowered the blade, and the droplet of blood flowed to the tip of the sword. With his wrist lifting and lowering the blade, the drop flowed continuously on the sword, never sliding off. Suddenly, energy burst forth from the sword, and the power in the drop of God's blood was also activated. It was like a divine art exploding, and the surging energy clashed with the power of Qin Mu's move, forcing him to move backward repeatedly. Qin Mu nodded and said solemnly, I have seen this God's blood before. A year ago when the snow disaster suddenly stopped, it was Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor who had found the god who was responsible for it. He fought a fierce battle with him and was severely injured at the end. However, that god was also injured and bled. When I treated Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's injuries, I saw the blood of that god, and the energy in that blood was very similar to this. Back then, Qin Mu had used a sword pellet that Mute had given him to act as a bridge to connect the remnant of the god's divine arts with the god's blood, activating their energies to wipe out each other and lessen the injuries. Only then was he able to treat Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. However, the obliteration of that energy had eaten up a lot of his sword pellet. It had been given to him by Mute to deal with village chief and comprehend a higher level of forging techniques. SP Qin Mu had regretted what happened to it for a period of time. Qin Mu remembered those days very well. It was because Emperor Yanfeng had been encircled by old Dao Master and old Rulai at the time, almost dying, and it had been Qin Mu who had saved him. Back then, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Emperor Yanfeng had both become useless and were in a terrible state. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had even brought his wife to live in seclusion in a random valley while his wife was pregnant. The god killed by Sunshot Divine Cannon is the god who sent the snow disaster. Qin Mu's gaze flickered between light and dark as he said softly, This is his retribution. He deserved to die. During the snow disaster, those that suffered were the poor, and the population of Eternal Peace Empire had instantly decreased by 20–30%. The number of people who had died was even larger than in most wars. The three from Little Jade Capital didn't say anything. When the snow disaster had erupted, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had gone to Little Jade Capital. Hermit Qing Yu had tried to stop him, wanting him to stay at Little Jade Capital to end the reform. The immortals of Little Jade Capital thought that it was the reform of Imperial Preceptor and Emperor Yanfeng that was the root of the snow disaster, so it had to be stopped for the disaster to end. Wang Muron and the rest had also heard about that matter. After being in a bad mood for a few days, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had still left Little Jade Capital, and not long later the snow disaster stopped. However, Hermit Qing Yu frowned at that and told them that Eternal Peace Empire was still determined to proceed with its reform. At that time, no matter if it was Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor or the Immortals of Little Jade Capital, none of them would have expected the events to proceed to such a stage. No one would have expected a god to fall, and it was a god that had sent the disaster. It was hard to say what change his death would bring to Eternal Peace Empire. No one could guess nor predict it. Qin Mu used clear water to wash the Emperor's disc numerous times, but he still didn't dare to touch it. He mixed a few herbs and let it soak in the concoction before finally picking it up. He then hung it back around his neck. Outside, the blood rain gradually stopped, and the dark clouds in the sky dispersed. The day became bright once again. Qin Mu and the rest walked out of the huge hall and rose into the air to avoid the blood water on the ground. The sky was clear, with no clouds for 10,000 miles. The battle above Eternal Empire was like a dream that had never happened. Sunshine came from the west, and the blue sky looked clear as though it had been washed clean. The air seemed to have become much fresher as well. The group stood in the air and examined their surroundings. Suddenly, Qin Mu looked to the north and saw a humongous object flying over. It was Sunshot Divine Cannon, and it was actually hurrying over to them through the sky. Emperor Yanfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stood on the floating battery, their clothes fluttering in the breeze. There were numerous officials by their side as well. Qin Mu had taught Emperor Yanfeng how to control Sunshot Divine Cannon, so he was probably the one who had fired it earlier. On the battery, the flames of the pill furnaces gave off white-colored rays, while the divine eye in the center was slowly revolving around and giving off terrifying might. Emperor Yanfeng's face was shining with happiness, and he was full of enthusiasm. "The divine cannon that you forged has shot down a god," Long Yu said. "The era has changed. Even a mortal can kill a god that's high above." "Human Emperor, is this a good thing or a bad thing?" "I don't know. I only know that the gods can no longer behave unscrupulously." Qin Mu's mind trembled. The Sunshot Divine Cannon he had forged had shot down a god that was high above. It was a kind of supreme honor. Long Yu looked at him and suddenly sighed meaningfully. "Human Emperor, there are many collections in my little jade capital. If you have the time, I would suggest you read about the history of the previous eras." Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He flew over to the battery and smiled. "I still have to return to the capital and research with Sister Yushio on how to cultivate primordial spirit on Six Directions realm, to push ahead with the reform. When there's time, I will go to Little Jade Capital. The old immortals there even promised me to let me have a chance to enter Hall of Five Qi." Long Yu sighed and didn't say anymore. Wang Muran was drunk with cultivation while Mu Qingdai couldn't sit still. Among the 3 disciples of Little Jade Capital, Long Yu was the only one calm enough to browse through the numerous books their sacred ground possessed. Sunshot Divine Cannon killing a god was admittedly shocking, but the consequences it might bring worried him. Wang Muran and Mu Qingdai also went toward the battery, so Long Yu could only follow along. "Your Majesty, Imperial Preceptor." Qin Mu and the rest landed on the battery and greeted the people there. Eternal Yanfeng could hardly conceal his excitement as he waved his hand. He said with a smile, "There's no need for formalities, Minister Qin. This cannon." Qin Mu smiled and said, "Does your Majesty feel invigorated?" Emperor Yanfeng was full of enthusiasm as he laughed out loud. "Great. This cannon I used just killed a god that had sent the disaster. This is far more than invigorating. This is enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. It's a pity that the other gods had run away too fast. Otherwise, we could have let Imperial Preceptor feel great, and even Minister Qin to have a taste of it." A scribe behind him coughed and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, mind your words." Emperor Yanfeng waved his hand and smiled. "Just don't record it and it will be fine. I have long itching to fire at least one bloody shot. But what could I do when it exhausts that much medicinal stones? If I hadn't heard that Minister Qin was in danger, having been kidnapped by a weird-looking god and there were gods fighting around here, I wouldn't have had the chance to use this huge cannon." "That's right, Minister Qin. Come and meet this victim, the sect leader of Great White Sword Sect. He came to make an imperial appeal, saying you brought a weird-looking existence and a bunch of flood dragons to seize his Great White Sword Sect." Qin Mu looked behind Emperor Yanfeng and saw a white-haired elder step out with a smile. "This sect leader said that you and that weird man seized the treasure of his Great White Sword Sect." Emperor Yanfeng smiled and said, "I felt that something was wrong here, so I invited Imperial Preceptor. He said that your Heavenly Saint cult didn't have so many flood dragons, so you were most likely in danger." Qin Mu thanked Imperial Preceptor. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shook his head. "There's no need to thank me, just thank Great White Sect Leader. If he didn't come forth to submit an imperial appeal, nobody would have known you were in danger." Great White Sect Leader immediately said, "One who does not know is not guilty. I thought Cult Master Qin wanted to seize our Great White Sword Sect and swallow our treasure, so I had gone forth to the capital in a hurry. Never would I have expected to be doing a meritorious deed by this. Cult Master Qin, are there any treasures in our Great White Mountain? If Cult Master really got a treasure, could it be returned to our Great White Sword Sect?" Qin Mu revealed a troubled expression, truly at a loss. He didn't know if he should tell the truth to the great white sect leader. Suddenly, a soldier flew over and reported, "Your Majesty, the god's corpse has been found." Emperor Yanfeng's spirit was greatly roused. He waved his hand and smiled. "Bring it up." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 379. Successor. No long later, the god's body was lifted up by several experts and its might filled the air. Yet it was merely a broken thing, split into so many pieces that they could never be put together again. The head of the god was still complete, though, and his face could still be seen. "It's the god I met. He said he came from high heavens," Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said after taking a look at him. "His abilities were extremely high. When I fought with him, I had to go all in to force him back, yet I was still crippled by him." The conclusion on that battle was Imperial Preceptor being so damaged that he dejectedly decided to live in seclusion beside the Blood Lake with his wife. If it wasn't for Qin Mu who had found him, he might have disappeared from the world from then on. Qin Mu examined the head and was slightly stunned. There was something familiar about it. It seemed to be made from fine jade, and even though the god was dead, there were still no flaws to be found. The man looked very young, unlike some elder one might expect. However, gods lived as long as the heaven and earth, so it was difficult to guess their true age from their appearance alone. "The head of this god looks a little like..." Qin Mu's expression was weird. The god and xianxia looked slightly similar, but the similarity wasn't only in their appearance. Xianxia was a perfect person who seemed like he was sculpted from flawless fine jade. He looked very exquisite. And the head was the same. It mirrored that of a human, but it was more like a jade carving than anything real. This god that was killed, could it be Jade Sovereign the Master Xianxia had once mentioned? Qin Mu stared with his eyes wide open. Xianxia's master, Jade Sovereign, could have very well been killed by Emperor Yanfeng with the cannon. Jade Sovereign was the person who sent disaster on Eternal Peace Empire, so he deserved death. I wonder what Xianxia's reaction will be when he finds out. Qin Mu pondered about it, but he didn't say anything. He didn't plan on revealing that relationship. If Emperor Yanfeng knew that Jade Sovereign was Xianxia's master, he would definitely get rid of Xianxia to prevent danger in the future. The emperor never went by the rules of the martial world. So because Qin Mu admired Xianxia very much, he didn't say a word, not wishing for him to die just like that. Minister Qin forged this sunshot divine cannon, so his contributions are endless. I haven't rewarded him yet, so I shall reward him with the head of this god, Emperor Yanfeng said. Don't want. Emperor Yanfeng's expression changed slightly, and he grunted as he felt his face was lost. Qin Mu then immediately smiled and said, I did not achieve anything in this battle of slaughtering the god, so how would I dare to take the trophy? Your Majesty had fired the cannon, and the number of medicinal stones exhausted must be great, so this trophy should be put into the imperial treasury. Such words were easy on the ears and gave the emperor face in front of his officials. Emperor Yanfeng was pleased. He smiled and said, Minister sees the overall picture and I shall not force you. This credit of forging sunshot divine cannon, I shall help you donate it to the imperial treasury. Qin Mu's face instantly turned black. Emperor Yanfeng laughed loudly, but he soon remembered how much medicinal stones were exhausted by the sunshot divine cannon and felt a pain in his heart. It felt great firing the cannon, but the money required for it was a terrifying thing. The battle between gods and devils had made Emperor Yanfeng lead the experts of the imperial court with the battery from the capital to the hills. He had to maintain sunshot divine cannon to fly in the sky, so the amount of medicinal stones used was definitely higher than when just firing the cannon once. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Ling Yushu might have brought numerous treasures back from Barbarian D Empire and Wolf Store Country, but sunshot divine cannon was like an abyss that couldn't be filled, a gold-swallowing beast. If he played with it for any longer than necessary, the empire would go bankrupt. This is the first god my Eternal Peace Empire slaughtered. Emperor Yanfeng raised his head to look at the sky and sneered. There may be a second and even third one from today onwards. My people are not fish and meat, and I'm not a coward that those gods can just mess around with. Return back to the court. Sunshot Divine Cannon gradually changed direction, and Qin Mu hesitated for a moment. He said, "Your Majesty, I still have some minor stuff I have to attend to, so I have to stay here for some time." Emperor Yanfeng looked at him and said, "Minister Qin, could you know those strong practitioners that were fighting against the gods? You want to stay to meet them?" Qin Mu nodded and said, "They are my elders." Emperor Yanfeng seemed to have a smile that yet not a smile. "There are quite a number of elders in your family. Can you introduce them to me? The empire is currently in need of talented people, and I would like to meet these experts with peerless talents." Qin Mu immediately pointed at Wang Muran and said, "There should be a few that were his elders. My elders don't really like to meet outsiders, so your Majesty should ask their elders." Wang Muran shook his head and said, "Your Majesty, my elders also don't like to meet outsiders." Emperor Yanfeng's face turned black. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor coughed and took a step to stand beside him. His body slanted nonchalantly, and he whispered in Emperor Yanfeng's ear, "Their elders are all remarkable people. On one side, there's old human emperor who is living in seclusion in great ruins and mysterious experts like Heaven Knife. On the other side, it's little Jade Capital. Your Majesty can't pull in any one of them." Emperor Yanfeng jumped in shock, astonished. He also knew about Little Jade Capital. Even though they were hidden in seclusion, its position was above the 3 big sacred grounds, and some mysterious old immortals stayed there. Yet Imperial Preceptor placed Qin Mu's family even above Little Jade Capital. Could it be a sacred ground that was hidden in great ruins? Imperial Preceptor, since there's the old human emperor, the human emperor of this generation. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shook his head and said, "The pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first. The human emperor of this generation won't be your Majesty." Emperor Yanfeng's heart trembled and he looked at Qin Mu, slightly dizzy. Qin Mu asked to be excused again, and Emperor Yanfeng hesitated for a moment. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor knew the thoughts of this ruler, aware that he had put his guard up against the new human emperor. "Your Majesty?" Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor coughed. Emperor Yanfeng came back to his senses and waved his hand. "Minister Qin, handling your matters is more important. You may withdraw first." Qin Mu jumped down from the battery. Wang Muran and the rest also went after him. Emperor Yanfeng looked at their figures moving away while Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stood silently behind him. He suddenly said, "Your Majesty had the intent to kill?" There was that moment. Emperor Yanfeng didn't hide anything from him and admitted without a moment's hesitation. "Him being the Heavenly Devil Cult Master already made me put my guard up. Even though Heavenly Devil Cult has a devil in their name, they are the #1 cult. They may be a sect in name, but they are actually a country in our country. I always felt uneasy by putting him in an important position. Now that he has also become the current human emperor, it makes me even more worried." He sighed and said, "Heavenly Devil Cult Master is so outstanding and such a person is hard to control. My sons and daughters won't be able to be a match for him. My life will come to an end in time, and then Eternal Peace Empire will be in his pockets. So my intent to kill had indeed awoken." He stood there and looked at Qin Mu and the rest leaving into the distance. "But it's gone now," he said with a calm expression. Emperor Yanfeng raised his head to look at the sky, and his tone became calmer and calmer. "Imperial Preceptor, even though you and I are minister and ruler, we are actually brothers and our hearts are connected. We are both outstanding and rare in this world. With you and I working together to reform the country, it is still so difficult. We seem to be piloting a small boat that could be flipped over any time by the strong gales and big waves. I was thinking, what if we failed? What if we died? Who shall succeed our mission in life?" He turned around with a fervent expression. He raised his hands and grabbed the shoulders of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, his eyes incomparably bright. "I have to think about my Ling family, about Eternal Peace Empire, our cause, the reform, so I can't have any intent to kill him. Our cause needs to have a successor, someone to follow in our footsteps after we fail. My sons and daughters don't have the ability, but he has. Isn't that right, my Dao friend?" Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor heard the phrase Tao friend and his heart moved. He nodded gently. He has the ability. Everyone knew he was the advocate for the reform, his thoughts and efforts concentrated solely on it. He wanted to be a saint that established his virtue, his merit, and his ideas in writing. However, no one knew that he had also faced a moment of weakness, of being at a loss, that he had also thought about giving up. The person that gave him the biggest support and made him persevere was his close friend. Emperor Yanfeng was his best friend, his most reliable comrade in arms. This kind of friendship was something others wouldn't understand. Tao friend. To have met such a Tao friend in this lifetime was enough for him. I will stand by your side. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked into the distance, his heart calm. Always. Qin Mu and the rest returned to the palace that was nearly soaked with spiritual qi and energy. When they landed on the ground, they saw that there were quite a few people waiting in the palace for them. Mu'er, return to great ruins with us. Blind stood up by propping himself on his cane. He walked toward Qin Mu and pulled onto his hand. He said resolutely, Butcher Village Chief, there's no need for further discussion. Let's go back to great ruins immediately. Butcher quickly rose and sheathed his knives behind his back. He said coldly, Blind, are you scared? Blind sneered at him. I'm scared? Half of my body is almost in the grave, so what am I scared of? On the other hand, it's you who is afraid, isn't it? Butcher was furious and looked like an angry lion. When have I ever been afraid? When you barely existed back then, weren't you scared? Blind said with scorn. You were sprawled in the mud and had to crawl over with your arms. I may be blind, but it doesn't mean that I can't see. I know the fear in your heart. Damned Blind, you weren't any better than me back then. Butcher pulled out his knives and Blind threw away Qin Mu's hand to grip his cane tighter. Both of them overflowed with murderous aura. Qin Mu hurriedly squeezed himself between them to prevent them from really fighting. Lying on a recliner, Village Chief said with his head hurting, All right, stop squabbling. You two are usually on the best of terms, so do you think it's worth falling out over this matter? Old Butcher, Blind's foresight is usually the best, and he wants Mu'er to return for the child's good. Mute, you usually talk the least, but what you say holds weight. What's your opinion? Hermit Qing Yu waved his hand and signaled for Wang Muran and the rest to come over. They immediately went to his side and asked in a low voice, Senior Uncle, what happened? Emperor Yanfeng killed Jade Sovereign of High Heavens. Wander Qing Yu said in a low voice. We know about this. However, why did these grandpas started squabbling? Mu Qing Dai asked in bewilderment. Hermit Qing Yu sighed and said, If Jade Sovereign of High Heavens had died under the hands of our little Jade Capital or Old Human Emperor, it would be nothing. At most we would have a grudge with High Heavens. However, since he died under Emperor Yanfeng's hand, Eternal Peace Empire will be in grave trouble. Blind wants Human Emperor to return to great ruins so he wouldn't be standing near a collapsing wall. Heaven Knife, on the other hand, wants to stay in eternal peace and scolds him as a coward. They have been fighting for quite a while regarding this matter. In the hall, Mute sat on the wooden chest. He took out a bag of shredded tobacco and lighted it up. He let out a puff of white smoke and squinted his eyes. What Mute said is logical. Village Chief nodded. The younger generations will do all right on their own. We are all old farts, so there's no need to worry. For how much longer will we live? Can we protect Mu'er for his whole life? Blind hardened his resolve and said, I want him to go back to the village no matter what. I'll find him a woman to make a baby, so he can live his life honestly. Why should we make him do what you couldn't do? Your limbs were severed, and this oaf even got his lower body chopped off. If Mu'er does what all of you did, everything under his neck will be chopped off. Mu'er, let's go home. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 380. Forced Love Will Surely Last. Butcher couldn't resist saying, Damned Blind, you are making decisions on your own. Have you asked Qin Mu about his opinion? I have no need to ask. He was raised by me, so I can make decisions on my own. After Blind said that, he pulled onto Qin Mu's hand and walked out of the huge hall. The flood dragons immediately followed after them. Village chief frowned and said, "Old Butcher, no need to chase after them. Blind will think things through." Butcher shook his head and said, "That old fellow's temper is even more explosive than mine." He was actually furious. In the hall, Hermit Qin Mu sighed ruefully. He said to Wang Muran and the rest, "Human Emperor invited us down the mountain to calculate the space algebra model of patching the divine bridge, and now that it's done, we have no need to remain in Eternal Peace Empire, this place of troubles. Will you guys follow me back to Little Jade Capital?" Long Yu and Mu Qingdai were somewhat hesitant. Long Yu wanted to return to Little Jade Capital, but he wasn't certain about it. His gaze subconsciously went to Wang Muran. Among the 3 disciples of Little Jade Capital, Wang Muran had the most ideas. Mu Qingdai had a playful heart, and the wonderful and brilliant encounters during the past few months made her want to stay. Wang Muran was silent for a moment, then said, "Disciple had met Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor just now." Hermit Qin Mu raised his eyebrows, and Wang Muran continued, "He no longer recognizes me." Hermit Qin Mu sighed and said, "He is Imperial Preceptor, so he naturally won't remember you. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor is working on the reform to change the world, creating a completely new structure. His path, skills, and divine arts see new development every day, and the speed of their improvement is godly. If I remain in Little Jade Capital to cultivate diligently, no matter if I work 100 times harder than him, I will never be able to surpass him in this life. Besides, he is also extremely hard-working." "You want to stay here?" Hermit Qin Mu asked. Wang Muran bowed. "Disciple would like to enter the change of an era brought by the reform which has already shown numerous things. The 3 sword forms of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, 6 directions Primordial Spirit of Human Emperor Qin, and also Sunshot Divine Canon as well as Meteorological Divine Arts. This shows that the paths, skills, and divine arts are already changing. If I stay in Little Jade Capital and miss out on this era, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor will never remember me. When I seek revenge on him, he will also not remember who I am even after killing me in one attack." Hermit Qin Mu sighed in his heart. "In that case, you shall remain here. Qingdai, Long Yu, what about the 2 of you?" Mu Qingdai smiled and said, "I'm also staying in case little junior brother doesn't have someone to look after him." Long Yu hesitated for a moment, then said, "Since junior brother and junior sister have both decided to stay, as the senior brother, I should stay behind and look after them." Hermit Qin Yu's head started to ache. "All right then, senior brother Yu He, let us return to Little Jade Capital." The 3 old immortals of Little Jade Capital rose and gestured to village chief, Mute, and Butcher before bidding farewell and leaving. When the 3 of them rose into the sky, Hermit Qin Yu said to Yu He and Yu Yun, "I'm worried about these 3 disciples, so you guys shall return to Little Jade Capital first. I will look over them in the dark." The Emperor killed a god of high heavens, drawing unpredictable consequences. If you stay, you might also be dragged into it. This place of troubles is not a good place to stay, Yu He immediately said. Hermit Qin Yu smiled and said, "Don't worry, I understand. My mortal heart is long gone, and I won't be tied down by the teeming world." When he said that, he went into hiding. Qin Mu sat down on the back of the dragon Qilin and went on a journey with Blind at a steady pace. He let Blind come up, but he didn't want to. He just continued walking toward great ruins with his walking cane. After some time, Blind suddenly stopped walking. Qin Mu made the dragon Qilin stop, and the numerous dragons beside him also stopped. After a moment, Blind sighed with frustration and disappointment. "Muer, Old Butcher wanted me to ask for your opinion, but I didn't do so. Now I ask you, are you willing to return to Great Ruins?" Qin Mu smiled and said, "Since Grandpa Blind wants me to go back, I shall go back. If I said I wanted to stay, would Grandpa Blind allow me to stay?" "Of course not." Qin Mu changed the topic and asked, "Did Village Chief ask Grandpa Butcher about how the sun, moon, and stars are all fake? Ask the pig slaughterer yourself." Qin Mu didn't talk anymore. The 2 of them continued on their way until the sky gradually turned dark. Qin Mu started a fire to make dinner, and after the 2 of them had finished their dinner, Blind raised his bamboo cane and drew a circle around Qin Mu. He said, Wait inside here and don't walk out of it. You can't walk out anyway. I shall go steal a wife for you, and you shall get married and make babies when we get back to the village." Qin Mu jumped in shock. Blind took his bamboo cane and leaped into the sky, vanishing without a trace. Steal a wife? Make babies? Qin Mu's mind was blown. He immediately tried walking out of the circle, but he suddenly heard a hum as the circle Blind drew burst forth with light, bouncing him backward. Grandpa Blind's restriction is very powerful. But Grandpa Cripple taught me heavenly pilfering divine legs which aren't afraid of any restrictions. Qin Mu exerted strength beneath his feet, but just as he executed heaven pilfering divine legs, he was bounced back again. The circle Blind had drawn was very marvelous. The size of the circle was precisely to counter heaven pilfering divine legs. Cripple's technique required extreme speed to break through the restraint of space. Only then would one be able to ignore all restrictions. Grandpa Blind taught me 9 Heaven's Eyes awakening skill, and isn't it just so that it can be used to break restrictions? Eyes awaken. Layers of formation swirled in Qin Mu's eyes when he opened Cyan Heaven's Eyes. Focusing his gaze at the circle, he couldn't help feeling decrepit. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. As the founder of 9 Heaven's Eyes awakening skill, Blind was known as Divine Eye Spear God. Because of his powerful divine eyes, he had extremely high attainments in the path of formations. Even if Qin Mu awakened all 9 heavens of his heaven's eyes, he still wouldn't be able to break free. I still have 2 huge eyeballs here, sun and moon jade eyes. Maybe they can break open Grandpa Blind's restriction. However, his expression became troubled. The circle Blind had drawn was so small that the 2 eyes couldn't be placed inside. Qin Mu took a look at the dragon Qilin and the dozens of flood dragons. He immediately took out the Emperor's disc and executed secrets of dragon control with the flute. The flood dragons then snarled and attacked the circle. Even with their numbers, they still weren't able to break the circle. The light screen kept on breaking down and reassembling itself, changing continuously to keep its victim trapped inside. Qin Mu also didn't dare to let the flood dragons use their full power. If the circle couldn't withstand the attacks and broke, he might be blown to pieces as well. He was completely out of ideas. He could only wait in the circle until Blind stole a wife for him. Sunshot Divine Cannon was still flying in the sky and floating back to the capital city. On the battery, Emperor Yanfeng looked at the burning pill furnace with an aching heart. In his eyes, what was burning weren't medicinal stones but bags and bags of great abundance coins. The amount burned made even him feel pangs of pain. At that moment, a human figure suddenly flashed past the battery and disappeared. What a fast speed! Emperor Yanfeng exclaimed in admiration. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked over. He looked into the distance and said, "Seems to be that blind old man who fought with the gods of high heavens. He should be the spear god from back then. It's a pity he can't be employed by me." Emperor Yanfeng sighed. When it came to midnight, that figure hurriedly sprinted back, passing by the battery again. Emperor Yanfeng took a look at him and asked suspiciously, "Why is the spear god carrying a huge sack?" "I have no idea." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was also slightly puzzled. The experts outside the mortal world all have some weird hobbies. The elders in Cult Master Qin's family all have some weird addictions that are hard to understand. When the sun was high up in the sky, they came to the outskirts of the capital and lowered the battery down. The guards in the palace immediately rushed out and knelt on the floor. "Your Majesty, we have a problem. The 6th princess was kidnapped last night by an old man with a walking cane." Emperor Yanfeng was in a daze. Old man with a walking cane? Imperial Preceptor. Was that spear god an old man with? Qin Mu woke up when the sky was already bright. Blind also returned at that time. He placed down a huge burlap sack, and there was a girl's voice coming from inside it. "Fatty pig, come over. Reveal your true form." Blind brought the dragon Qilin over and had him transform into a huge behemoth that was 120 yards long. Blind placed the burlap sack on his back and walked over, erasing the circle with his bamboo cane. He smiled and said, "Mu'er, return to the village to get married. Grandpa Blind, forced love does not last." Qin Mu immediately said, "It will definitely last." Blind brought him to the dragon Qian's back. He said while beaming at him, "If it doesn't last, I will just return it and change to a lasting one. You are in for a treat, boy. Fatty pig. Stop in the town in front and buy some phoenix coronets and bridal gowns." The dragon Qian acknowledged his command. His true form was extremely wide, and when he ran it was as steady as a huge ship. Qin Mu undid the burlap sack and beautiful black hair flowed out from inside. A familiar fragrance assaulted his nostrils. The burlap sack squirmed, and Ling Yuxiu raised her head up. A cloth was stuffed in her mouth, and she cried out while nudging forward. Blind stood to the side and smiled proudly. Qin Mu immediately pulled the girl out from the burlap sack and saw that her arms and legs were tied firmly by golden ropes. She couldn't move at all. He pulled out the cloth from her mouth and was about to untie the golden rope when the burlap sack suddenly squirmed again. There was another maiden inside, and she popped her small head out. Qin Mu was shocked and immediately went forward to bring the other maiden out from the burlap sack. It was xianxia who looked flustered, her beautiful hair messed up. Qin Mu's mind was blown and he stuttered, "Gee, Grandpa Blind, you kidnapped too." There was still something moving in the burlap sack, and Qin Mu's face couldn't help turning black. A small girl popped her head out and looked helplessly at him. Qin Mu was completely speechless. "Why have you even kidnapped Linger?" He went forward in a hurry to pull the little girl that was around 6 or 7 years old out. "When I went to kidnap the princess and the saintess, I picked her up on the way." Blind was still beaming at him. They were all living in Imperial College's Divine Arts residence, right next door. "There's no time like the present, so you shall marry and consummate tonight. Who do you like? Choose freely." Qin Mu pulled out the cloths in xianxia and Hu Linger's mouths. Hu Linger was overjoyed and asked bashfully, "Are we getting married tonight?" "I'm still not prepared." Blind smiled and said, "No matter if it is the princess or the saintess or even the little demon fox, it's all fine. If you want to marry all three at once, that is also all right. I can get to carry babies sooner. Say, who do you pick?" The three girls looked nervously at Qin Mu, who didn't say a word. He went to undo the golden rope, but it suddenly revealed a head. It opened its mouth and almost bit him. Qin Mu jumped back in shock and immediately pulled his hand away. "This is dragon's tendon and not any ordinary rope. You can't undo it." Blind sneered and said, "This dragon's tendon is the tendon of a real dragon and not something of those flood dragons." Qin Mu sighed and said, "Grandpa Blind, you are messing around again. Granny, why are you here?" Blind immediately turned back, and Qin Mu exploded with heaven-pilfering divine legs to run away at full speed. Blind raised his bamboo cane to tap at the void. The next moment, Qin Mu lost all his strength in midair and fell from the sky. Thump! A heavy object landed in the distance. Truly worrisome. Blind shook his head and took out another golden rope. It flew out and firmly tied Qin Mu up, flying him back to the dragon Qian's back. "Grandpa Blind, forced love doesn't... Ooh." Blind stuffed a cloth in his mouth and put him with the three girls while muttering to himself, "One day one girl, it will surely last."